This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Immortal Naruto was saved by Serafall. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. While wasting no more time, let's start the story.
As she entered the clearing in the vast forest she was exploring, Serafall Leviathan hummed joyfully. Serafall opened her vivid purple eyes and glanced around, swaying her pigtails as she checked to make sure she wasn't being followed. When she noticed she wasn't being followed, the small girl with a lot of breasts and a pink magical girl outfit grinned broadly. She was already known due to her MAU status and her known television program, Magical Girl Leva.tan. Even though she loved the attention, coming to this clearing was the best way for her to relax, get some privacy, and clear her head. In addition, she discovered her super secret special spot in this area of the forest in the human world. Only one individual was aware of it. She was nevertheless saddened by the fact that the other individual who was aware of this location was confined here. The girl in the pink outfit put her hand in front of her, palm open, and smiled broadly as she tried to lift her spirits. Serafall wasn't a MAU for nothing, but a moment later she was blocked by a big barrier. The girl grinned as she stepped through the barrier, which opened when she moved her hand to unzip it. Shortly after, the hole she created closed. The entire scene changed from a vast forest to a lovely clearing with a sizable lake as she passed through the barrier. Large sakura trees bordered the lake's edge in the clearing, and the air was filled with cherry blossoms. There was a tiny area of land with the biggest tree she had ever seen in her life in the center of the huge lake. At least a few hundred meters into the sky, it was incredibly long. There appeared to be a sizable spore of some sort at the top of the tree, but it appeared to her more like a rose that had not yet opened. From behind her, a male voice said, "Sarah-chan, you're a little behind schedule." Serafall turned to the man who had spoken to her and giggled sheepishly. "I apologize to Naru.tan, but I had to avoid a lot of my fans to get here. It took me almost an hour, and even then they didn't let up," Serafall said, sounding a little childish as she giggled sheepishly. Naruto smirked at the black-haired beauty and shook his head. Taking a close look at the male, Serafall grinned. When she first met him, he seemed to still be dressed in the same clothes. In all honesty, Serafall couldn't picture him wearing anything other than the clothes he was wearing at the time. The man with the blonde hair had a tiny orange sun carved into the center of his black bodysuit. He had on an orange coat with black flames licking the sleeves and bottom over his bodysuit. He was wearing black sandals with an orange stripe across the middle. He wore orange gauntlets with a smiling fox head set into them on his forearms. The remainder of his golden blonde hair fell over his forehead and occasionally swayed into his eyes, while two bangs framed his face as it fell over his shoulders. He had 3 whisker marks on each cheek. His amused and confident sapphire blue eyes gazed into Serafall's purple ones. Naruto grinned and remarked, "I'm sure that you did, Serafall. But you're safe here, no need to worry about fanboys." As the blonde gestured, "Now come here." Arms outstretched, Serafall bounded toward the blonde, eyes brightening. She hugged the blonde tightly and grinned broadly as she pressed her ample bust against his chest and nestled her cheek against his. "Naru.tan time. Yay," she exclaimed. Naruto laughed, forcing himself to hide the red flush on his cheeks, and instead gave the girl a hug in return. "So tell me, Sarah-chan, how've you been? Anything interesting happened?" he inquired. Serafall made her look very adorable by putting a finger on her chin and making a thoughtful face. Serafall said sweetly, laughing to herself as she tried to recall whether or not that name was correct. "I've been great. As for if anything interesting happened, I heard from my little sister that Rias-chan had just gotten a new pawn recently. If I remember right, his name was Hoyaku-isan? No, Kakugoki-insan? No, was it Hagomo-kana? No, it was Hyodo-ise, I think." Naruto found her vertigo amusing and adorable, and he let himself laugh at it. Serafall smiled as she watched Naruto laugh, delighted to see one of her favorite people in the world. She loved the sound of the blonde's laugh, which was like music to her ears. She would never grow weary of it even if she listened to it indefinitely. Naruto laughed and patted the smaller girl on the head as she smiled at him, saying, "Oh Sarah-chan, you always know how to make me laugh." For the next 2 hours, the two talked about enjoyable activities they engaged in as well as other things they could do with their ample free time. The two were content to simply be together as they laughed and joked while sitting beneath the sakura trees. When Serafall had finished explaining to Naruto the current and upcoming episodes of her TV show, he asked, "Anything else interesting happen?" "Yes," replied Serafall with a childlike smile while she pretended to spin around. "My hit show Magical Girl Leva.tan is getting its first movie," she exclaimed with a beaming smile. "I hope it will be one of many to come in the future." Naruto nodded and gave himself a slightly childish smile. Well, if anyone can help you get more movies in the future, it's you, magical girl Levia.tan. The blonde replied. Serafall, beaming, threw herself at the blonde and embraced him tightly. Naru.tan has always believed in me. I think that deserves reward, she roared. Naruto blinked. Reward? There's no nay. Then, in a startled silence, Serafall leaned up and kissed his neck firmly. Naruto stayed motionless for a moment before blushing and trembling with embarrassment. For a few more seconds, Serafall kept her lips on the blonde's neck, biting and sucking a little before releasing them with a loud pop. She giggled joyfully at the handiwork and smiled at the blonde's embarrassed expression. Despite the blonde's capacity for healing, the hickey mark on his neck would not go away for some time. She added magic to that kiss to ensure it. Gazing brightly into her favorite blonde's eyes, Serafall asked with a smile, does Naru.tan like his reward? Red in the face, Naruto stammered. He answered, W. Well, it was interesting. With her eyes shining and her lashes thudding, Serafall whispered into his ear, does Naru.tan want another one? Naruto sputtered. W. Well, T. That is T.to say, I. Serafall gave Naruto a full-on kiss on the lips, stopping him from speaking once more. She gestured silently for him to follow suit, her lips slowly moving against his. The blonde eventually started moving his lips in time with hers, fulfilling her wish. The black-haired Mao was ecstatic as they closed their eyes. With the blonde's arms around her waist to keep her in place, Serafall shifted until she was straddling him and pressed her hands on his shoulders to deepen their kiss. Serafall groaned softly as Naruto's hands squeezed her butt, and they continued to move their lips against each other's. Serafall opened her mouth when she felt something touch her lips, allowing Naruto's tongue to slide in and play with hers. She moaned as she played with Naruto's tongue, and as they kissed, their two tongues started to play together. They slurped occasionally, their tongues slipping lightly against each other as they exchanged saliva. Naru.tan tastes. Slurp. Is. Slurp. Delicious. Slurp. Serafall was able to escape between kisses, and although their lips parted, their tongues remained together as they played in the open, their saliva trickling down their chins as their tongues continued to play gently. Serafall pushed Naruto back until he was on his back, pulling her face away, their tongues unable to play because of the increasing distance. Gathering her saliva in her mouth, Serafall lowered herself once more and pressed her lips against the blonde, opening their mouths as their lips pressed. Serafall took advantage of this and let the gathered saliva enter Naruto's mouth, slurping it all up as she did so, their tongues playing again. The two moaned together as they kissed. As he stayed in lip lock with the black-haired, purple-eyed beauty, Naruto managed to say, Sarah-chan. Slurp. Your. Slurp. Taste. Slurp. Is. Slurp. Wonderful. Slurp. While groaning, Serafall's eyes opened in surprise when she felt something hard brush against her lower regions, deepening their kiss even further, if that is possible. It took her a moment to realize that Naruto's crotch was also where her lower region was. Having a flash of insight, the black-haired girl started grinding herself on the blonde's crotch, and as they both felt the pleasure of the action, they moaned a little louder. As she continued to grind her scared area on the blonde's restrained rod, Serafall couldn't help but moan as they remained in lip lock, and she became aware that Naruto's hands were slowly moving up her back and her sides. She moaned slightly at the feel of his touch on her smooth skin through the fabric of her clothes. For the first time, Serafall truly hated her clothes and she wished they were gone. Moaning as his hands reached her breasts, she gasped in the blonde's mouth as he squeezed her breasts. Letting go of her breasts, letting them press against his chest as they did originally, the blonde moved his hands up until they reached Serafall's head, where he began to gently caress her hair through his fingers. Serafall slurped some of the blonde's saliva while she continued to grind her snatch on the blonde's rod. The purple-eyed girl arched her back and accelerated her grinding as she sensed an increase in pressure in her loins. When the pressure reached an unbearable level, Serafall separated her lips from Naruto, leaving a trail of saliva that kept them together, before she climaxed with a little scream of pleasure, her fluids soaking her underwear and leaving a big stain on Naruto's crotch. Naruto leaned up and pressed his lips against Serafall's, allowing his collected saliva to make its way into her mouth, and the black-haired beauty eagerly slurped it all up. Panting, Serafall lowered her head and gave Naruto a few more gentle kisses, with the blonde returning them just a little. Raising her head slightly, their tongues continued to play gently as Serafall let more of her saliva trail down her tongue and into the blonde's mouth. As they parted ways, Serafall let out a joyful sigh and laid her head on the blonde's chest, admiring the sound of his heartbeat as Naruto laid his chin on her head and sniffed her. What caused this? The blonde inquired. As she lay on his chest, Serafall pondered for a moment before responding, Naru.tan. Since I first discovered you following the Great War, I have been coming here for centuries. I traveled for centuries. As you listened, I told you stories about the outside world. You're telling me tales of a time before angels and devils existed. You are among the world's oldest creatures, most likely as old as the Infinity Dragon herself. Serafall paused and grinned at Blonde, who was paying close attention to everything she said. I discovered a great deal about you during the 3 centuries I spent with you, and you discovered a great deal about me. I had the best 3 centuries of my life. Whenever I wasn't with you, I would constantly ask myself, how are you doing? Was he okay? What if he suffered an injury? Naru.tan. You are loved. She cried out, pressing her face against the blonde's chest and giving him a tight hug. His eyes widened in shock as he gazed down at the girl who was clinging to him. He found himself smiling fondly, his eyes displaying a hint of love, as he lowered his head and gave her a gentle kiss on the head, attracting Serafall's attention as she gazed at him with bright purple eyes. This girl had visited him for 3 centuries, destroyed all the loneliness he had felt, and made him feel confined to this place. He genuinely said, I love you to Sarah-chan. With a broad smile, Serafall leaned up and gave the blonde a tender kiss, which the blonde returned as he stroked her cheek. They parted after a few long moments of precious air, and Serafall leaned on his chest, listening to his heartbeat with a cheerful, bright smile on her face, and after a few minutes of remaining there in his arms, Serafall spoke. Naru.tan. The male gave her a curious hum as she started, Why are you stuck here? Although you told me many stories, you never really explained who you were or how you got stuck here. Serafall worried that she might have gone too far during the many long minutes of silence, but her suspicions were allayed when she felt and heard the blonde sigh. With a sorrowful expression in his eyes, Naruto tightened his hold on Serafall and gazed up at the enormous tree. My tale begins at the night of my birth, he said, and he started telling his story, beginning with his own birth. He explained to Serafall how a masked man abducted him soon after his birth, forcing his father to temporarily leave his mother behind while he rescued him and made sure he was safe, how the masked man tore out a sealed entity that had been sealed inside his mother since she was a child, how his father saved his mother and put her by his side, and how he battled the masked man until he forced him to back off, leaving his father to face the terrifying Kyuubi no Kitsune. He went on to explain how his mother helped his father seal the beast inside him, and how, as their final act as parents, they gave their lives to ensure his survival. Naruto then started to tell Serafall about his early years. He hesitated but told her how the villagers constantly overcharged him, how they ignored him, and how lonely his early years were because he was unable to make any friends. Serafall almost started crying when she heard this, but she managed to keep her composure while listening. For a single moment in her life, the cheerful and carefree Mao made Serafall hate people, but she quickly put that moment of hatred behind her when she stomped it out of her head so Naruto could continue his story. He told her about how he met his teacher and team leader Kakashi, how he came to view one of his teachers, Iruka, as a surrogate older brother, how he later passed the academy after being misled by his other teacher Mizuki about a test, his team assignments with the guy he disliked, and a girl he had been crushing on since he was a child. He told her about Kakashi's test, which made Serafall giggle for a moment, their assigned D ranks, and finally how they had their first C-ranked mission that eventually turned A-ranked. He told Serafall about his grandfather, the Sandaime Hokage, and how he was selected by Jiraiya to obtain Tsunade of the Sannin so that she could assume the role of Hokage. He then described his encounter with Zabuza and Haku, their influence on him, and their eventual deaths as they passed away as humans rather than the tools they thought themselves to be. He told her about Tsunade's hesitation to accept the hat and how, after a protracted battle with Orochimaru and his apprentice, she finally agreed to take it. Naruto then told Serafall that, after assuming the role of Hokage, Team 7 had many adventures after she took the seat, and that, gradually but surely, Team 7 was disintegrating as Sasuke gradually separated himself. He then talked about his 3-year training journey with Jiraiya, his training, and the enjoyable activities they did together. He described how Sasuke defected and how Naruto was forced to face him at the Valley of the End. They engaged in a lengthy and undoubtedly epic battle, and Sasuke won because Naruto hesitated and instead scratched his forehead protector. He continued by describing how his brother and fellow friend Gaara was in danger after being attacked by the Akatsuki, and how they rescued him and raised him from the grave after he had passed away for a brief period of time at Granny Chiyo's expense. He told her how Sasuke eventually killed his brother, Itachi, and directed his anger and hatred towards Konoha, how Tobi, the same masked man who killed his parents, manipulated Sasuke and made him a monster driven by retaliation, how Pain, the alleged leader of Akatsuki, killed Jiraiya, and how Serafall was shocked by his training to become a senjutsu master. He told her about his fight with Pain, his brief encounter with his father after he gave in to his anger, and the result. He then went on to tell her about the 5-Cage Summit that was created after Sasuke allegedly defeated and captured Jinchuriki of the Hachibi and Killer Bee, the Raikage's brother, but he later discovered that it was a hoax. In order to find Danzo, the unofficial Rokudame, who did not receive the ceremony, he told her that Sasuke attacked the 5-Cage Summit. He then told her how Sasuke defeated the 5-Cage and then went after Danzo, killing him and having a brief encounter with him. Shortly after that, he told Serafall how Tobi, who now went by the name Madara, declared war on the 5 great nations. He told her about his battle with the 9-tailed entity, his training with Killer Bee to master its power, his brief encounter with his mother and the truth he learned from her, his defeat of the Kyuubi and mastery of its power, how he and Killer Bee became great assets in the war, and how Madara was using Kabuto to bring the dead back to life to fight alongside his white Zetsu army. He soon arrived at the scene where Madara, the real one, appeared and decimated almost a quarter of their forces using only taijutsu, a few fire-style jutsu, and his brief use of the Susanoo. He described how Madara managed to activate the Rinnegan, the same eyes that Pain held, the terrifying godlike power Madara wielded as he crushed the rest of their forces with massive meteors. He told her that the 5-Cage would soon appear and that they would fight the real Madara while he fought the fake one. He went on to tell her about his lengthy battle with Tobi, how he eventually became friends with the Kyuubi, and how, with the help of Guy, Kakashi, and Killer Bee, he finally broke the mask he was wearing. Eventually, Toba's identity was revealed to be Obito, and Serafall was shocked to learn that it was Kakashi's best friend and teammate who was believed to be dead. He informed her that soon after Toba's identity was made public, Madara showed up beside Obito, and Naruto soon discovered that the ancient Uchiha had mercilessly vanquished the 5-Cage. Thus began the long battle with Madara and Obito, which saw several near misses because of Madara Uchiha's raw strength in battle, hardened intellect and Obito's dangerous skills. Later in the fight, when it seemed like there was no hope left, the rest of the Ninja Alliance arrived to help fight the 2 Uchiha and the recently resurrected Jubi. The heroic fight to stop the Jubi, and how everything seemed pointless until Obito became the Jubi's Jinchuriki, and shortly after the arrival of Sasuke and his group, the revived past Hokages of Konoha, after Orochimaru's startling appearance. They finally defeated Obito after a long and exhausting battle, but shortly after, Madara betrayed Obito by fully reviving the ancient Uchiha, who gained back his flesh and blood. Even without his eyes, Madara started destroying the majority of the Shinobi Alliance again after he recovered his sight, and he easily defeated the 9 Biju before absorbing them into the Gedo Mazo along with Naruto's Kyuubi and Killer Bee's Hachibi. He finally told her how Madara became the Jinchuriki of the Jubi and how he had finally mastered the true power of the Sage of 6 Paths. He also told her how he and Sasuke had a brief encounter with the Sage of 6 Paths and how the ancient sage had given them power boosts. Madara once again demonstrated his godlike strength when he defeated Guy after he unlocked all inner gates, and how he intended to destroy Guy's body entirely if he hadn't stepped in, as Sasuke appeared next to him. After that, the protracted battle ensued, and they were unable to thwart the Moon's Eye scheme. Madara had intended to destroy them all, but Black Zetsu had betrayed him by revealing that he was actually working for Kagaya. Kagaya was brought back to life, and even with their power boosts, they were helpless against the divine woman whose strength even outmatched that of the Jubi. He told her about their lengthy battle with Kagaya and how she kept transferring them all between dimensions, about Obito's death after risking his life to save Kakashi's, about Kakashi's power-up after obtaining both of Obito's Sharingan, and about the terrible metamorphosis that Kagaya went through. He concluded by explaining that, in spite of everything, they were unable to seal the changed Kagaya, so a different solution was devised. He sealed off the dimension they were all in using the Biju's remaining chakra as well as the underground chakras of Sakura, Kakashi, and Sasuke. They intended to leave the transformed Kagaya there indefinitely while they used Kakashi's Kamui to escape. They almost managed to do so, but the transformed Kagaya tried to smash them all to pieces, so Naruto threw them all through the portal, leaving him alone trapped with the beast Kagaya had become. There, Naruto informed her that he and Kagaya had been fighting for millions of years, and that the blonde's blood and his strong chakra, particularly the Kyuubi Withina, had given him something approaching immortality, allowing him to die but not age. After a long and never-ending battle with Kagaya, he had finally vanquished her by enclosing her whole form in a tree and creating a seal that siphoned her chakra and channeled it into the seal, keeping her in their home isolated from the outside world. "I've been here for millions of years. ensuring that Kagaya never escaped her restraints and that I would be there to seal her if she did. Naruto concluded, glancing into Serafall's sorrowful eyes. Serafall whispered, millions of years. That's a long time, she said abruptly. You're an Oji-chan, she chuckled. Naruto crossed his arms and pouted, saying, oh, am I an Oji-chan? I guess Sarah-chan doesn't want any more kisses from this Oji-chan, he started. Serafall chuckled uneasily in panic. No, Naru.tan is not elderly, he's quite old, she replied. Naruto laughed and cupped Serafall's cheeks before lowering his head and softly kissing her as she joyfully returned. Serafall parted ways and paused to gaze at the enormous tree. Will she ever escape? Concerned about whether Kagaya would ever be freed from her bonds, she inquired. I put thousands of seals on her over the years to make sure she never gets out of her prison, Naruto said with a small sneer. Furthermore, she would have to find a way out of this dimension that I had sealed us in, even if she managed to get away, he said. Even so, I've installed at least 1 million seals to make sure that nothing ever gets in or out. He remained silent for a while and gave Serafall a deadpan expression. Now think about it. The blonde said, I'm still trying to figure out how on earth you keep getting in and out of here, Sarah-chan. Serafall winked and giggled. The great Levia.tan is unstoppable. She twirled carelessly as she spoke, and Naruto grinned and laughed while stroking her black hair. Serafall landed on his lap as she joyfully leaned into his touch. Serafall opened her eyes and gazed into Naruto's sapphire blue eyes, her purple ones a little beseeching. Can you accompany me, Naru.tan? Get out of here. Leave this place and go out into the world? She asked quietly. Naruto pondered for a moment, frowning at the enormous tree. What about her? If she does escape her restraints, I must be present, he said. You yourself said it. She has an almost impossible time getting out, she said. In addition, you can still come here, just to be sure. Naruto chuckled and scratched his head, blinking in surprise at the sense her reasoning made. You make a fair point, Sarah-chan, he said. Very well then, I'll go. He grinned at Serafall's joyful cheer, and she jumped up and down on his lap like a child on sugar. On one condition, he said, causing her to freeze in place. Remember when you told me of the evil peace system? Naruto smiled and leaned down to her ear, causing her to groan. Following her nod, he went on, I want you to make me a member of your peerage. Serafall gasped in surprise as he said, yes, she still had her entire set of prototype evil pieces, but that was because she never really had an interest in forming her own peerage. Why? She inquired. As he responded, Naruto smiled and kept licking her ear lube. I want everyone to know that I belong to the wonderful and fabulous Levia.tan. He bit her ear gently while she groaned, whispering in her ear, what say you, say? Raw. Fall. He moved down to her neck and nibbled and kissed it while drawing out her name. With a groan, Serafall pressed herself against the blonde, her arms encircling him as she merged her small body against his, her big breasts against his chest. Serafall responded, flushed, as she started kissing and nibbling on his neck. Okay. Only if Naru.tan promises to make sure people knows that I belong to you too. The blonde replied, already done. He glanced at the hickey he had left on her neck and smiled a little as he used his chakra to make sure it would never come off. In addition, the hickey was functioning as a Hiraishin seal. What? His dad could mark you with a Hiraishin seal simply by touching you. Why couldn't he go further and do it better? Naruto was almost certain that he could mark you with a Hiraishin seal if you even touched him anywhere on his body, though he hasn't tested that out completely. With a smile on her face, Serafall reached for her magical girl staff, leaving Naruto perplexed. She placed her hand on top of her staff and opened it to reveal a secret compartment, from which she took a chess piece after inserting her thumb and finger. Naruto whispered in surprise and admiration, a secret compartment in your staff that leads to a small pocket dimension. The blonde informed her, very impressive Sarah-chan. She smiled softly at Naruto and motioned for the blonde to lie on his back. The blonde, astonished to see Serafall straddling him, laid himself on the grass and she smiled down at him, giving him a loving, reassuring look as she put the chess piece on his chest. She smiled joyfully as the chest piece glowed and started the chant as a circle formed beneath the two. You, Naruto Uzumaki, are accepted as a member of my peerage by me, Serafall Leviathan. As my queen, may you lead a happy new life. After saying, my love, Serafall lowered her head and kissed Naruto tenderly as the chess piece started to sink into her body. Naruto shuddered a little and concentrated on the kiss while his body changed from human to devil, feeling something twitch on his back and his strength growing as his already long lifespan increased even further as he felt his powers increase even more as a result of receiving the queen piece. At the end, Naruto easily kissed Serafall again, his arms encircling her small frame, and he sat up, staring into Serafall's purple eyes as they parted, a trail of saliva connecting them as their tongues went back to their mouths. Then the trail of saliva broke, and Naruto turned to look behind him when he heard the tearing sounds of clothing. After his newly acquired bat-like wings decided to free themselves, he was left with nothing to do but stare as the back of his clothes were destroyed. Naruto heard laughter and looked at Serafall, who had no scratches on her clothing but her wings were free. Devils wear special clothes that lets our wings bypass the fabric to let them free without destroying clothes in the process, she stated. I'll have new clothes custom tailored for you. Thank you, Sarah-chan. Serafall squeaked as the blonde took her hand and pulled her down to sit in his lap, their wings vanishing into their backs as they cradled each other. Serafall shifted in his lap until she was facing him, and she put her arms around his neck, pulling him down for a passionate kiss as the blonde put his hands on her waist. They moaned and intensified the kiss as Serafall's lower parts rubbed themselves on his crotch once more. The black-haired beauty pouted at the blonde as Naruto pulled back a little, letting his tongue play with Serafall's tongue in the open for a few long moments. Gazing up into her eyes as she looked down, Naruto grinned and said, "Well, Sarah-chan, I don't know about you, but I for one am curious about the outside world, since I've been trapped here for so long." He stood up, laughing, and heard Serafall squeak as she secured herself by wrapping her legs around his waist while the blonde put his hands on her thighs. Serafall grinned and gave the blonde a brief kiss before letting go and letting Naruto gently place her on the ground. She quickly grasped his hand and drew him along with excitement, saying, "Come on, Naru-tan. The prospect of you meeting my Okawa-san and Oto-san excites me," she exclaimed with excitement. She blushed slightly as the blonde spoke huskily in her ear. "Shouldn't I call them Okawa-san and Oto-san as well, Sarah-chan?" The blonde said more than she asked, and she froze as he put his lips close to her ear, his hot breath sending a shiver of pleasure down her spine. Serafall blushed more deeply and grinned broadly as she kept dragging the blonde along. "Yes." As the two Serafall opened the barrier by making a tiny rip in the air, Naruto laughed and kissed Serafall on the cheek, still incredulous at how the girl had done it. "Okawa-san and Oto-san would love it if you did," she said joyfully. Naruto ignored the thought and gazed into Serafall's brightly sparkling eyes before smiling softly and leaving through the portal as it closed behind them. The Sea-Tree family was one of the 72 pillars of the underworld. They were among the highest of the 72 noble families because the former heir was now the Leviathan. They shared the Gremory clan's fame and prestige, and, although they were as loving as the Gremory, they also regarded their servants as close friends and family. Even though the current lord and mistress were well served by Sea-Tree house servants, and some of them had the privilege of playing with Serafall during her childhood, the older servants found Serafall's childish antics to be exhausting whenever she came to visit and spent the night. When they had a bad day, they found Serafall's childlike demeanor refreshing, but they were also relieved that the mistress and Lord Sea-Tree's second daughter was older than Serafall. You can imagine their surprise when a magical circle appeared in front of them with the Leviathan symbol glowing in the middle. The two guards at the front gate took their jobs very seriously. They were the most serious of all the servants when on duty, but somewhat relaxed when not. They knew who was coming, so they did not tense or anything like that. Instead, they stood there casually, as if it were an ordinary occurrence. Imagine their astonishment when Serafall showed up with a dashing young man in her company. They assumed the young man was a Phoenix clan member based on his blonde hair, but something told them that was not the case. The young man's sapphire blue eyes gazed at Sea-Tree Manor with innocent curiosity before turning to face the two guards and grinning warmly at them both. The two guards noticed the blonde's beaming smile as Serafall turned to face her. "Naru-tan. Greetings from Sea-Tree Manor." After exchanging a quick glance with his fellow guard, Serafall exclaimed with excitement, her eyes glimmering as she gazed at the blonde. The guard on the right side and coughed into his hand. With a slight tilt of her head, Serafall turned to face the guard, and Naruto followed suit. "Serafall-sama. It's good to see you here again," the guard said professionally. "If I may ask, who is the young man with his?" he inquired courteously. Serafall responded with a radiant smile while holding Naruto's hand and entwining their fingers. "This is Naruto Uzumaki, my new queen of my peerage, and someone very special to me. A pleasure to meet you, Naruto-sama." The two guards blinked, looked at their entwined hands, and observed Serafall's cheerful and bright expression. They also noticed the blonde's sheepish but content smile in his eyes. "Please, you do not need to bow in front of me," Naruto said, raising his hand in a comforting gesture while his eyes were warmly looking at them. "Additionally, don't hesitate to call me just Naruto," he said kindly to them. I trust you are here to see Lord and Lady Citri, the two guards said, their eyes sparkling with laughter as the blonde gave them a deadpan expression. Of course Naruto. Sama. He urged them to confront Serafall. Sama and Naruto. Sama. Serafall grinned broadly and started pulling the blonde with her, who gave her a wry smile in return. Come one Naru.tan. Now let's see Oto. Chan and Oka. Chan, with excitement, she said. The two guards were silent for a few seconds as the two went through the gates, and then the second guard said, I like that guy. The first guard shook his head and chuckled a little. I do as well. He added, but something tells me things are never dull with him around. The second guard shrugged. As long as Serafall. Sama is content, isn't that right? He uttered those words. Yes. As long as she's content. The first person concurred. When they finally arrived at the main room door, Serafall opened it with a broad smile on her face. Serafall joyfully dragged the blonde through the halls of the manor, the maids and servants watching in confusion and surprise as the small girl with the big breasts pulled the taller and handsome young man through the halls. Oto. Chan. Okay, Chan, with joy, the girl yelled. At her entrance, two figures in their chairs blinked and then grinned broadly. Ah, Serafall. My daughter, how are you? The man, who had shoulder-length black hair that was slightly disheveled but firmly combed, asked. His dark gray eyes were warm and kind when he saw his daughter. The other figure was female, with long black hair that fell to her waist, bangs that resembled Serafall's, and purple eyes that glowed with joy when she saw her daughter. 2. Chan, I'm all right, Serafall replied with a radiant smile. Lord Citri said, grinning as he looked at his daughter, that's good. Lady Citri stood next to her husband, closely examining the blonde next to her daughter, and said, oh my, who's this strapping young man with you, Serafall? Lord Citri looked at the blonde next to his daughter, blinking, and tilting his head curiously. Clutching Naruto's arm while giggling, Serafall grinned at her parents and said, 2. Chan. Ka. Chan. This is Naruto Uzumaki, my queen and someone very, very special to me. Lord Citri and Lady Citri blinked in confusion and were silent for a long time before beaming joyfully and saying, my daughter has finally found a man. Hello, my future son.in.law. Said Lord Citri, beaming with excitement and shedding anime tears. You may refer to me as 2. Chan. With a squeal, Lady Citri pulled Serafall and Naruto into a jaw-dropping embrace. Yes. Grandchildren are finally on the way. When are you two getting married? What time is the wedding? I have to know. As she let them go, she told them with excitement. Lady Citri squealed as she hurriedly took a picture, and Naruto leaned down and kissed Serafall, who blushed as she gave him a lovely smile. Naruto laughed at Serafall's parents' antics and discovered that he liked them both. Both Naruto and Serafall spent the rest of the day with Lord and Lady Citri, with the blonde feeling completely at home with the two as they enjoyed themselves as a family should. When they finally bothered to look at the time, it was already midnight, and it was decided that Serafall and Naruto would stay overnight. The two of them shared a bed as Lady Citri took another photo of them sleeping together, while Lord Citri was happy to chuckle quietly in amusement at his wife's antics. That's Sarah. Chan's younger sister, isn't it? Naruto pondered. The blonde was in a tree on the school grounds of Kuho's academy. His form was undetected as he sat on a branch with his back against the bark of the tree. He smirked a little and used his camouflage jutsu to conceal his presence, just as Sona was looking out her classroom window, her purple eyes narrowing upon the tree he was sitting on. After she turned away, Naruto laughed and let go of his camouflage technique. She's far more observant than I gave her credit for. The blonde reflected. Using his improved vision, he glanced into another widow's classroom a few classrooms away from Sona's class and soon saw a girl with crimson red hair sitting in front of the window, her turquoise eyes intently observing her class instructor. The crimson-haired girl turned her head and narrowed her eyes at his tree as he activated his camouflage technique once more. Naruto released his technique when she turned away and chuckled for a moment, saying, how interesting. That's Rias Gremory, isn't it? She seems to be as perceptive as Sona, which is impressive. It makes sense that they are competitors, he thought wryly. Laughing, the blonde started comparing the two sisters in his mind. He could see that they were similar in that they both had black hair and purple eyes, but that was about all. Sona's hair was significantly shorter than her sister's, who had long hair. She wore glasses. Her chest was not quite as large as Serafall's, and he could tell that she had a serious personality, which was a sharp contrast to her sister's carefree and childish demeanor. When Naruto heard a bell ring, he tilted his head slightly and saw that all of the students were getting up and moving around. He raised an eyebrow when he saw Sona and Rias both get up quickly and vanish into the hallways. Naruto grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief, and he couldn't wait to tease Serafall's younger sister. The blonde shrugged and leaned back on his tree, covering his eyes with his hands. A few moments later, he activated his camouflage once more, almost grinning, as Rias and Sona arrived and gazed at the tree's numerous branches, particularly the branch the blonde was perched on. Now come out. Before releasing his camouflage technique, Naruto looked around to make sure no other students were near the tree. When his form was revealed, the two girls tensed, their eyes narrowing slightly as they gave him cautious glares. "We know you there," Sona demanded, and Rias frowned slightly with her. The girls narrowed their eyes and the two kings scowled at them as he said, "A pleasure to meet you, Sona. Chan, Rias, Chan. How did you find out about us?" "Did Rias ask?" Naruto replied, laughing. "You two are very well known in the underworld. But because someone always talks well of Sona, I found out more about her. Naturally, I'll find out about you, Rias, when I hear about you, Sona." Sona narrowed her eyes and wondered who the blonde was referring to. She could only think of one person who had said nice things about her, but she brushed the idea aside right away because her sister wouldn't talk to a stranger like that unless she knew them or they piqued her interest, and these days she hardly notices anything. "Who is it that informed you about me?" Sona made a chilly demand, and Rias joined her, glaring slightly as well. Naruto grinned and said, "I'll give you 2 small hints." "I see no problem giving them a few small hints." They narrowed their eyes in thought, and he said cryptically, "You know the person well, and I am also a piece in their peerage." His eyes sparkled with laughter. The blonde turned and looked at the Hiraishin seal he had placed on Serafall. "Well, I must be going now," he told them, getting up from his leaning position, and Rias. He trailed off, attracting the crimson-haired girl's attention as she noticed the warm look the blonde was giving her. "Congratulations on your pawn's recent victory over Razor." To the surprise of Sona and Rias, who stared in mild disbelief at the spot he occupied, the blonde absently placed a Hiraishin seal on the tree and vanished into thin air as if he had never been there. She should be done filming her most recent episode of her Magical Girl show. Naruto couldn't help but frown as he watched Serafall pace tensely back and forth, realizing why she was so anxious, why there was so much worry in her eyes, and the onset of panic and hysteria. Lord and Lady Citri were similarly distressed, but their facial expressions were more controlled. But Naruto could feel the anxiety and fear washing over him in waves. The blonde stood up and walked toward the still pacing Serafall, sighing as he did so. The girl turned and buried her head in his chest as he held her, and Naruto stroked her hair while whispering consoling words into her ears. "Don't worry, Sarah-chan." While continuing to stroke her hair, he whispered to her, "I'm sure Sona will be fine. Naru.tan. I firmly believe in Sona.tan. But Kokebiel is her opponent." She told the blonde with worry and concern, "There's a reason he's one of the generals of the fallen angels." Knowing why she couldn't help her beloved sister right now, Naruto sighed softly and stroked her hair. Kokebiel had built a strong barrier around Kuo Academy, one that even kept the Mao's power at bay for a considerable amount of time. Naruto had a suspicion that the barrier would hold up for at least 2 days, even when the Mao attacked. It was an incredibly strong barrier. But the blonde knew that the Hiraishin seal he had put on that tree back then would be useful, but would it give him a way to get past Kokebiel's barrier? There was only one way to know. With a look of resolve in his eyes, Naruto seated Serafall next to her parents, much to the girls' surprise as Lord and Lady Citri looked on in interest. He kissed Serafall tenderly on the lips before stepping back a short while later. "Naru.tan?" Serafall inquired bewilderedly. The blonde gave Lord and Lady Citri a two-fingered salute and flashed Serafall a warm smile before saying, to their bewilderment, "I'll make sure Sona is safe." The blonde gave them one last glance before disappearing into thin air, concentrating on the Hiraishin seal he had put on the tree back in Kuo. Moving through that barrier with the Hiraishin was surprisingly difficult. It seems that the barrier was also designed to prevent others from simply teleporting in. Naruto had to actively push himself through, otherwise he would not have made it through the barrier, which in turn injured him to some extent. When Naruto's form materialized, the blonde had to lean against the tree he previously occupied as his injuries healed. After his burns healed, the blonde stood and narrowed his eyes in the direction he sensed Kokebiel's power, along the path of Rias's and Sona's peerage. The blonde vanished in a flash of speed as he passed through Kuo's school grounds, his form a blur as he almost broke the sound barrier, and in a matter of seconds, he arrived where everyone was. God has passed away. When Kokebiel's voice yelled, Naruto narrowed his eyes and listened intently from his rooftop perch as he described how God perished in the Great War. Naruto frowned as he noticed the disbelief in everyone's eyes as they took in what Kokebiel had to say, with the orange-haired girl and the blue-haired girl being the most affected. A new great war will start with your deaths, now die, Kokabeel yelled maniacally. The strong fallen angel general was about to launch a huge spear of light he had formed in his hands with that cry, and he would have if Naruto had not intervened. What? Kokabeel shouted in surprise as he felt his forearm being grpped with such strength that he actually winced in pain. Turning his head, Kokabeel stared at the man who interfered, the blonde-haired man giving him a small smile. But there was something cold in that smile of his. Who are you? As Rias and Sona stared at Naruto in shock, Kokabeel asked, forming another light spear in his other hand. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Although the blonde did wince slightly as he held the spear, Naruto felt some amusement as everyone's eyes widened in shock at the fact that he was holding Kokabeel's light spear. Just call me Naruto though, Naruto told him, channeling chakra into his hand as he raised it just in time to catch Kokabeel's light spear. Kokabeel smiled slightly at Naruto's wince and said, You're not entirely immune to light. Naruto narrowed his eyes, clenched his fist, and broke the light spear in his grasp. Everyone's eyes widened in shock as they realized that he, a devil, had not only a light spear in his hands but had also crushed it. After the light spear was destroyed, Naruto put his hand by his side, with the other hand still holding Kokabeel's forearm. To everyone's surprise, the minor burns on Naruto's spear. Wielding hand healed quickly. So you're Kokabeel? Naruto said, It's a pleasure to meet one of the fallen angel generals. Kokabeel instantly leapt back a few meters from the blonde, wariness in his eyes as he looked at the blonde. Kokabeel narrowed his eyes and thought, He's not completely immune to light, but he's a devil, so he shouldn't even be able to withstand the properties of light, since it's poisonous to devils after all. And his hair, which is blonde and almost the same shade as the Phoenix clan, but he's obviously not a member of the Phoenix. He's a reincarnated devil, and the energy I sense from him is not as pure as a pure blood. Kokabeel pointed two light spears at the blonde while scoffing and smiling sadistically. Naruto Uzumaki, tell me something, he said. Who is your boss? The fallen angel demanded. Sona and Rias, as well as their peers, listened intently to Kokabeel's demand, wondering who the blonde's master was. Naruto smirked a little and took a deep breath before letting it out. Gradually, an orange tint spread across his eyes, turning his iris yellow and his pupil into a horizontal bar. Then, all of a sudden, a pale blue aura swept across the blonde, his power erupting in waves as everyone sensed it and was astounded by the sensation he created. As Rias's rook, Kaneko, shivered violently and her hazel eyes widened in fear, she whispered in terror, Senjutsu. Being close enough to hear Kaneko's whisper, Rias and Sona's eyes widened in shock. Sona stared at Naruto's form in shock and disbelief, thinking, Senjutsu? Impossible. It said Senjutsu is impossible to control. Kuroka the stray cat is proof of that. How is it that this man is able to retain himself despite using Senjutsu? Who are you? Everyone's attention was drawn to Naruto when he said, You asked who my king was. Then, with wings flying out of his back, he suddenly appeared in front of Kokabeel, startling the fallen angel with the speed at which the blonde moved. That knowledge is useless to you. Naruto grabbed Kokabeel by the face and flew through the air, shattering the sound barrier in the process. The fallen angel rag-dolling through the air as he crashed in the island, Naruto continued to fly at the speed of sound, breaking through the barrier Kokabeel created and flying through the ocean as several islands passed by them. Naruto stopped at an uninhabited island and threw Kokabeel down towards the island, hovering slightly above the ground before his feet touched it, his wings retracting as he glared into the dust. The fallen angel's form had a lot of sand covering him before he brushed it all off. Kokabeel used his wings to blow the dust aside, and as he quickly scanned the area, he saw a number of huts and a house made of straw and wood. Kokabeel glared at the blonde, asking, Where are we? Did he ask? The blonde replied, Welcome, to Nassau. When the blonde said, Nassau? Impossible. Nassau is halfway across the world. There is no way we could have traveled halfway across the world. Kokabeel's eyes widened slightly in shock, but he could not deny the age of the huts and houses as he looked at them again. Indeed, this island was Nassau. During the height of piracy, this was one of the primary pirate strongholds. Kokabeel scowled as he regarded the blonde with fresh caution. Such speed. In a matter of seconds, he was able to travel almost half the world. How fast is he, exactly? Cold sweat trickled down his neck as he pondered. Naruto said, Oi! Are you ready? This will be our battlefield. Here, we can go all out and not worry about the lives of anyone. Kokabeel complimented, Oh! Very considerate. After saying, but ultimately foolish, with no restraints. I'll crush you where you stand. Kokebiel let go of his grip on his abilities. As the sand surrounding him started to rise and lift off the ground, his form was suddenly enveloped in a dazzling light energy. Naruto stopped stifling his abilities and narrowed his toad-like eyes. A tiny shock wave erupted from him, his form enveloped in a dark blue aura of chakra. Kokebiel's eyes widened as he became a little uneasy. Such unadulterated strength. And the way this energy feels. Chakra. And senjutsu, not just any chakra. With a tinge of fear, he thought. Once more, he demanded, who are you? I guess I can indulge in your curiosity seeing as we are the only ones here. Naruto thought about it. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Naruto Uzumaki. A sage. And the queen of Serafall Leviathan. He said. After Kokebiel's eyes widened to epic proportions, he cackled maniacally and a twisted grin spread across his features. This works in my favor, Queen of Serafall Leviathan. If I can kill you, then the war one had hoped to start will start. With you dead, Serafall will want retribution. Get ready to die at my hands, Uzumaki. Kokebiel cried, licking his lips with a crazed gleam in his eyes. With a taijutsu stance, Naruto said, oh? Is that right? You wish to start a war? I have no choice but to stop you then. In any case, prepare yourself, Kokebiel. Arms were held at his sides, fists slightly up, knees bent slightly. It's been a while since my last fight. So forgive me if I'm a bit rough. Kokebiel was unaware of what had transpired. He was glaring at the blonde while standing erect one moment. The following one? The blonde punched him so hard that he was hunched over, clutching his stomach. He wheezed in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. The fallen angel mumbled in surprise, such speed. Naruto said, like I said. Forgive me if I'm a bit rough. I don't know my own strength in this form, so I apologize if this fight is short. He said with a slight smirk. Kokebiel was not given any time to recover as Naruto struck the fallen angel's face multiple times with a lot of force in each blow. Every blow stunned the fallen angel, leaving him defenseless. In preparation for kicking the fallen angel across the field, Naruto raised his leg. The blonde blinked in surprise as Kokebiel, who had finally recovered, ducked under Naruto's kick. Because of this, the sage was caught off guard when Kokebiel buried his fist in the blonde's face. The fallen angel did not stop hammering his fists into the blonde's face. Naruto grabbed Kokebiel's fist and pushed it aside, causing him to spin while holding a light spear. The fallen smiled, ready to cut the blonde's head off. If Naruto hadn't ducked under the light spear, he would have been successful. Naruto struck, the two blades nearly piercing the fallen angel's flesh as two kunai materialized in his hands. The fallen angel would have taken to the skies with its wings flapping if Kokebiel hadn't leapt away. As he smiled wildly, dozens of light spears formed around him. Kokebiel snickered, die, as the blonde's motionless body was showered with spears. Naruto tensed and ducked. Naruto threw one of his kunai to the fallen angel that was hovering, weaving between two light spears. Kokebiel tiled his head and snorted with laughter as the knife flew by. As soon as Naruto was out of his line of sight, Kokebiel opened his mouth to taunt the blonde, but his words died in his throat. The fallen angel felt a white-hot pain shoot out of his back, but he was dumbfounded and unable to respond. As the fallen angel screamed in pain and agony, he turned to look behind him and was startled to see Naruto burying a spinning blue ball of energy in his back. Kokebiel moaned as he fell to the ground, his wings severely damaged and removed from the battle. With his form largely unharmed from their battle, Kokebiel growled at the blonde who fell to the ground, painting his wings back into his back. Kokebiel formed a light spear and hurled it in the direction of the blonde. Naruto avoided the spear, but his eyes followed it as it vanished over the horizon. Naruto felt the spear explode in the distance, and his eyes widened in surprise as he turned to face the fallen angel. Naruto was shocked to see the explosion that had taken place at least a few square miles away as he turned back to the direction the spear had been traveling. Amazing power. However, nothing was comparable to Kagaya. He turned back to the fallen angel and gasped as he felt Kokebiel run through his body with a light spear, proving that she could actually create and shift dimensions at will. The fallen angel grinned and said, "Got ya." Naruto spoke, smirking as blood trickled down his chin. He said, much to Kokebiel's perplexity, "No. I got you." Boom. Naruto then exploded, throwing Kokebiel back with tremendous force. What the fuck? Exclaimed Kokebiel. As he straightened himself, he whispered, "Did he just commit suicide?" The voice next to him said, "In a way it was suicide." Kokebiel's eyes widened and he looked over to see the blonde standing next to him, after saying, It was a good shadow clone. Too bad it had to die. Naruto kicked Kokebile in the head, causing the fallen angel to skid across the floor. As the fallen angel dug a little trench, the sand began to gather and leave. The fallen angel glared at the blonde while shivering and shaking sand from his body. When Kokebile saw the blonde holding a blue spinning ball, his eyes widened and he felt a surge of fear. The 4 large white spinning blades on a blue spinning ball made a screech sound as they spun. I can't allow that to happen to me. When the blonde threw the ball, the fallen angel tensed and dodged, smiling as it missed. Naruto's fist clenched, and Kokebile's smile faded. The Naruto exclaimed, "Expand." When Kokebile's right arm was struck by a white dot hot pain, he screamed in agony as the ball grew and burst, tearing his arm to pieces with dozens of tiny wind blades. When it was finally over, Kokebile gasped and clutched his right shoulder, removing his entire right arm up to the shoulder. Kokebile kept his hand on his wound, panting as he lost blood and grunted in pain and agony. According to Naruto, surrender. Naruto grimly uttered, "I do not wish to kill you. Please, just surrender." The fallen angel gazed at the blonde with a crazy gleam in his eyes and growled in rage. "Never. The war. The war must begin anew. How else am I supposed to gleefully kill devils and angels?" Kokebile yelled with rage. Naruto scowled and closed his eyes for a moment. He said gravely, "I see, you're nothing but a crazy, hungry dog." Naruto scowled for a moment as he formed another Rasen Shuriken in his hands. The blonde tossed the Rasen Shuriken in the direction of the fallen angel, saying, "I take no pleasure from this." With a snort, Kokebile glared at the spinning sphere that was approaching him. "War will begin. If not by me, then by someone else," he grumbled. Kokebile experienced a searing, white dot hot pain as the Rasen Shuriken struck him, and then all he could see was darkness. Naruto sighed solemnly as he stared at the location where Kokebile used to be. Naruto clutched a feather and stuffed it in his pocket. He concentrated on the Hiraishin seal he had applied to Serafall, tugged on it, and quickly disappeared. He was immediately glomped by Serafall, the black-haired beauty, who was holding his midsection tightly when the blonde returned. She said, "Naru-tan. I was so worried." Naruto gave her a gentle pat on the head while tilting her head and stroking her cheek with his hand. "There's no need to worry, Kokebile is no longer a problem, and your little sister is safe." Serafall stood on her toes, grinning broadly as her eyes glistened with tears of happiness and relief. Naruto lowered his head and planted a tender and heartfelt kiss on her lips. Lord Cetri shook his head slightly in amusement as the two ignored Lady Cetri's squeal as she took a picture. Naruto saw a sparkle in Serafall's eyes as they parted. Naruto claimed to have seen Serafall lick her lips as her eyes glowed with love and lust as they teleported, while a magical circle bearing the Leviathan symbol materialized beneath them. Naruto reappeared in a different room, noting that they were in Serafall's room specifically, but that they were still in Cetri Manor. Naruto blinked, taken aback when Serafall pushed him onto the bed and briefly kissed him while straddling his form. Mao's purple eyes purred softly in his ear. "I believe Naru-tan should be rewarded for saving my little sister." Sultrily, she whispered in his ear, "I can't wait, I've wanted to do this for so long." Naruto absently observed that their clothes were gradually slipping off of their bodies, their bare skin melting against each other as Serafall's curves blended flawlessly with the blonde's body, and he once again kissed the blonde and she kissed him back. The manor was soon completely quiet. A number of loud, muffled noises emanated from the direction of Serafall's bedroom, causing the maids, servants, guards, and even Lady and Lord Cetri to halt their activities. They included screams of pleasure and moans, among other sounds. They were able to make out some muffled words thanks to those sounds. These phrases included, "Oh, by the Mao. Harder. Faster. Deeper. It feels so good. And the well-known. I'm coming." All of the servants' faces were redder than a tomato by the time 20 minutes had gone by, and they all rushed to get earplugs. They sighed with relief when they could no longer hear Serafall performing the dance with her special someone. As Lord and Lady Cetri excitedly started coming up with names for their future grandchildren, all they could do was cry anime tears. However, later on, they were laughing and crying because the servants were wearing all of the earplugs. To avoid hearing their daughter dance the tango with their prospective son.in.law, they resorted to putting paper towels in their ears. However, that didn't stop them from exchanging notes about potential grandchildren's names. Issei, Aria's pawn and the owner of the Red Dragon Emperor, whispered, "So that was Bushu's older brother?" Issei had met his king's older brother earlier today. It would be an understatement to say he was shocked. The elderly man resembled Rias quite a bit. As Sona walked beside Issei and Rias grinned at her pawn, Sona replied. Indeed that was. The class representative, who had black hair, gave Issei a stern look. Consider yourself lucky, Issei. You caught a small glimpse of Searsex the first time when you crashed Rias's wedding. Today, you met him officially. Not many devils have that honor. Remember that. Changing the subject, Rias said, So Sona, how's your peerage doing? With a slight frown at her pawn's overzealous attitude, Sona responded, They're fine, even though Sanji has been quite eager to prove he's better than Issei. Rias said, Sanji is certainly unique. Issei gave a snort. According to the boy with the brown hair, a closet pervert is more like it. Sona gently retorted, and being an open pervert is better? Is proudly exclaimed, At least I can be open with my desires. Which caused a few students nearby to give him a sour look. Sona gave her pawn a small smile, but Rias just giggled. Along the way, the three met with Akano, the queen of Rias, and Tsubaki, the queen of Sona, as they strolled through the halls. The group grinned as they made their way down the corridors, with students separating for a moment and giving Issei sly glares. Sona paled slightly in horror as a voice yelled, Sona.tan, and everyone froze. Everyone turned to see the face of a smaller girl sprinting in their direction. Like Sona, she had black hair, but it was longer and styled in two pigtails. A pair of more ample breasts than Sona, and purple eyes a shade brighter than Sona's. She was also wearing a magical girl costume. The students whispered to one another about the identity of the newcomer. Issei watched in bewilderment as Sona paled further. Rias just giggled. Akano joined her, and Tsubaki sighed. Serafall threw herself at Sona, holding on to her sister and smiling broadly as she gave her a hug. Sona.tan. Sona let out a little gasp to catch her breath. Oh, Oni. Sama. What are you doing here? I wanted to see my little sister, exclaimed Serafall with joy. Issei and the other pupils all let out a startled gasp at that. Sister. Sona noticed something unexpected from her sister at that precise moment. Sona saw her sister look at the students, human students, with a hint of bitterness and distaste, ignoring the other devils around them for a moment. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Sona blinked, dismissing it as inconsequential. In Serafall's case, the black-haired beauty needed to prevent the resentment she was experiencing from intensifying. However, she was powerless to stop her resentment of the people who were gathered around them. Naru.tan, the humans who had injured her. She was aware that it was stupid. The humans who had harmed her, Naru.tan, had long since vanished. However, that didn't stop the sensation from growing. Rather, she concentrated on her sister while beaming broadly at Sona. She gave Tsubaki, Akano, and Rias a joyful smile while glancing over the other devils. Before realizing that Rias had a new pawn, she cocked her head slightly in curiosity at Issei. That's Hyoko Ike, then? Or was it Isobu Hyaku? She wondered absently. Issei felt the impulse to cry anime tears all of a sudden, because he couldn't figure out why. He just stared at Serafall and made comparisons to Sona. Sona stayed in her sister's arms, embarrassed, and said, Oh, Oni. Sama. Can you let me go? Sona sighed with relief, grinned broadly, and bounced on the balls of her feet as Serafall blinked and released her sister. I want you to meet someone special, Sona.tan, she exclaimed with joy. Akano, Tsubaki, and Issei all cocked their heads in curiosity, and Sona and Rias blinked, wondering who Serafall was referring to. Sona inquired inquisitively, Oh, who is this someone Oni? Sama? Serafall cupped her mouth and looked behind her with a happy smile. Naru. Tan. You can come in now, Serafall yelled, startling the students with her loud voice. The doors at the end of the hall opened just as Naruto's form walked down the silent hallway, and the male students gave him a venomous glare while muttering about another attractive boy invading their territory. The female students all gazed at the blonde hottie with hearts in their eyes and drooled a little. Knowing that he was the one who had saved their lives from Kokebile, Rias, Sona, and Issei could only look in shock at the blonde. Naruto continued his easygoing gait and paused next to Serafall, grinning at the two kings as Serafall held onto the blonde. Naruto meets Sona.tan, and Sona.tan meets Naru.tan. With joy, she said. With a roguish charm, Naruto said, Nice to officially meet you, Sona. With a hint of caution in her eyes, Sona said, Nice to meet you too. Rias scowled a little too, not trusting the man, but if he was with Serafall, he should at least be trustworthy. Who exactly is Oni? Sama? Sona inquired. My full name is Naruto Uzumaki. Sona, Naruto said, and Serafall's eyes brightened as she spoke. As to exactly who I am, the blonde trailed off. With a broad smile, Serafall took over. To everyone's surprise, She put a hand on Naruto's cheek and then, to their further surprise, she leaned her head up, meeting the blonde halfway as they shared a brief kiss. After a short while, they parted ways, and both Serafall and Naruto looked at the shocked expressions of Sona, Rias, and their respective peerage members, while the human students also looked shocked. Your brother.in.law, Sona.tan, will be Naru.tan, after dropping the bomb, Serafall exclaimed with joy. There was a long period of silence during which the sentence took some time to register, and when it did, there was only one answer. Your brother.in.law, So.tan, will be Naru.tan. Sona Citree's mind was fried by those words and sentence. She appeared blank on the outside while everyone else loudly expressed their shock, but on the inside, things were different. Her brain was trying and failing to understand the situation, and the gears were turning at a never-before-seen pace. Your brother.in.law, So.tan, will be Naru.tan, doesn't work. Doesn't calculate. Risk. You run the risk of having your brain fried. Action is recommended. Turn off your brain to allow it to cool. Would you like to continue? Verified, the cooling process is now temporarily underway. Stopping all mental processes. Closed starting at 3, 2, 1. Shutdown is starting. Please wait while we reboot. Reboot finished. Displaying the last known message. Your brother.in.law, So.tan, will be Naru.tan, computing. Computing. Mistake. Mistake. Unable to calculate correctly. The names of newly enrolled students as well as data containing previously signed principal paperwork are being erased, along with any other minor information that is necessary for proper computation. The deletion process is finished. The last known message has been calculated correctly, and the appropriate response protocols are now being activated. Back in the real world, Serafall continued to cling to Naruto's arm while smiling joyfully in amusement at the other people's reaction. Since she literally dropped the bomb, everyone looked like a fish out of water, and the Gremory's expression conveyed her shock, while the black-haired Mao almost burst into tears. Akino's expression was similar to the redhead's, with the exception that her smile appeared to be frozen on her face. The redhead's eyes were wide, almost like glittering white plates, with pupils that looked like tiny little dots. Her mouth hung from her jaw, and Serafall was positive that it might have fallen off any lower. Isan, or was it Iken? Rias's pawn appeared to be receiving lightning magic shocks on a regular basis, as evidenced by his wide, open eyes and jaw hitting the ground. Her dear sister's queen, Tsubaki, looked like a fish out of water, and Serafall almost chuckled when a little drool escaped her lips, but Serafall was more interested in Sona's reaction, as her little sister's expression had not changed and was still blank. She cocked her head, wondering if she had broken her sister. Then, suddenly, her little sister fainted. Oh, it appears that Rias had also joined her. Serafall stared at her sister's and Rias's unconscious bodies for a moment before turning to face Naruto, who had a gleam of laughter dancing in his eyes, and Serafall knew that he was trying desperately not to laugh. The blonde looked at her, and after they exchanged a single glance, the dam burst. They threw back their heads and laughed uncontrollably, with Serafall falling on the blonde's chest and laughing as she held her sides, her pink hat falling off as she let her staff fall to the ground, and Naruto falling on his back with loud laughter and tears of laughter in his eyes. The two finally stopped laughing after a few moments. Too soon? After catching her breath, Serafall asked with a slight smile. Too soon. Naruto laughed and said, we should have eased them into it. He and Serafall laughed together, and then they kissed. Naruto grinned a little and got up, lifting Serafall up as he did so. The black-haired beauty yelled as she put her legs around his waist to keep herself balanced, and then Naruto put her on her feet. After they parted lips, she winked at him suggestively and whispered in his ear, we need to find a private room in the school. Naruto blushed a little but laughed. Before he put her on her feet, he licked her lips and whispered, so daring. Because of her small size, Serafall had to look up at the blonde, and she gave him a cute little pout as he gave him the final tease. Her purple eyes sparkled as she pouted, and she crossed her arms over her breasts, making herself appear larger. Naruto laughed and lifted her pink hat off the ground. As he put her staff back in her hands, he gave her a tender kiss and said, you are so adorable when you pout like that, Sarah-chan. Serafall grinned broadly and bounced joyfully on the balls of her feet while humming a childish song. The human students, females, had just recovered from their shock and were all squealing at the loving and affectionate display. Serafall was irritated and disgusted by humans again as she heard their murmurs and awe-inspiring whispers. The bitter feeling at humans flared up in her heart again, but she forced it down again, telling herself that hating the current generation of humans would not solve anything. However, she didn't think she would ever be able to protect humans as eagerly as she used to. Fortunately, Naruto's words broke her train of thought. Well, Sarah-chan, I don't think we can leave Sona-chan and Rias-chan here in the hallway. Consider taking them to the council room until they awaken. In this manner, we can respond to their inquiries in a confidential environment, Naruto stated. Serafall nodded and smiled broadly. Akeno-chan, Tsubaki-chan, Isan-chan, for us, bring So-tan and Rias-chan to the council room, she gave the order. Still in shock, Akeno and Tsubaki obeyed her orders without question, but Issei is my name, he cried out. Ignoring them, Serafall grabbed Naruto by the arm and said, come on, Naru-tan. I'll show you around the school for a little while, and maybe find a nice empty room, she exclaimed joyfully, whispering to herself. Naruto laughed and let himself be pulled along, ignoring Issei as he sobbed anime tears. For a considerable amount of time, Serafall enthusiastically led Naruto on a tour of Kuo, pointing out the different classes and the numerous lessons that each one offered. Naruto listened intently, his eyes sparkling with interest. In his day, the academy only taught basic to advanced math, history, writing, and the shinobi arts. Now that there were classes for cooking, drawing, technology, and a host of other things he couldn't name, Naruto found it all so fascinating that he smiled, knowing that the next generation's kids were being taught so many practical skills. At the moment, the couple was strolling down an empty hallway, Serafall grinning broadly as she held his arm. The blonde was perplexed as Serafall placed him on one of the nurse's room's beds after Naruto grinned down at her and was startled when she abruptly pulled him into the nurse's room, which was now empty because the nurse was out for the day. Serafall, laughing at his bewilderment, said, wait here. She vanished into the room's closet, and Naruto chose to amuse himself by exploring the space, which, to be honest, was very similar to any other typical hospital room except that it was much cozier and the walls were light blue instead of white. As soon as Naruto heard the closet door open, he turned to see Serafall leaning against the door's frame. She was dressed in a nurse's outfit that was several sizes too small for her, but she still looked stunning and delicious. As she approached the bed, Serafall slithered sensuously onto Naruto's lap, her purple eyes blazing with lust, love, and desire. Naru-tan looks sick. Serafall licked her lips and gazed into the blonde's eyes, whispering, good thing that magical nurse Livia-tan is here to take care of you. She then blew her breath gently onto Naruto's neck, wrapping her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist before putting her legs around his waist. Naruto played along, grinning, I'll be under your care. Livia-chan, he whispered, softly kissing her neck. Sensing that her cheeks were getting hot, Serafall let Naruto kiss her neck. A few seconds later, she raised Naruto's face to her with her hand, and they kissed softly at first, then more intensely. Serafall opened her mouth when she felt Naruto's tongue touch her lips, and soon their tongues were playing, the delicate muscles encircling each other and exploring each other's mouth. Serafall moaned and started to take off Naruto's shirt, their lips briefly separating before they were reunited. She idly observed Naruto placing a hand on the floor and a ceiling matrix covering the room, and she was able to recognize the kanji for silence, and she joyfully smiled into the kiss. Serafall gently pushed him until he was lying on the bed, and she smiled affectionately at the blonde as she connected their mouths once more. Naruto took off her nurse's shirt, and a few moments later, their skirts and pants joined the little stack of clothing on the floor. Many of the lessons that day would have been interrupted if Naruto hadn't placed a seal that made the room soundproof. Sona's C-tree groaned as she came to, and her mind started thinking about why she was unconscious right away. Within a matter of nanoseconds, dozens of ideas came and went from her mind, until she finally remembered what had caused her to become unconscious. Her eyes snapped open, and she sat up instantly. To her left, a man's voice, full of laughter, said, well, looks like you finally awake. So-tan is awake. Cheers. Slowly turning her head, Sona froze as her purple eyes caught the scene in front of her. Sitting in a chair was the same blonde, Naruto Uzumaki as she recalled. Serafall, a Mao and her sister, was settled on Naruto's lap. Her arms wrapped around the blonde's neck. Serafall bounced on Naruto's lap a few times before she jumped off, landing on her feet and enveloping her sister in a hug. So-tan is awake, she exclaimed with joy. Sona felt as though the air was being forced out of her lungs. Oni-sama, I require air. Naruto put a hand on Serafall's head and made him laugh, attracting the black-haired beauty's attention as Sona wheezed. He told her, Sarah-chan, I'm pretty sure your sister needs air to live. She laughed sheepishly and let go of her sister, Sona gasping as her lungs gulped in greedy breaths. After she recovered, Sona glanced at the smiling pair before letting out a sigh. Please give me an explanation. But first, could you please explain why the council room is empty? She rubbed her temples as she spoke. Certainly. Naruto laughed, and Serafall put her back on his lap. Sona felt uneasy as she watched them interact, rubbing their cheeks together and snuggling into his warmth. To begin with, Rias woke up half an hour before you did. She walked out of the room looking blank and muttering that she was dreaming the entire time, without actually saying anything. The blonde started. Sona nodded a little, not shocked by what Rias had done, and to be honest, she felt as though she was dreaming. Why is there no one in the room? Well, when Sarah, Chan and I unexpectedly entered, your peerage was creating quite a stir. What was Serafall's name again? He finally whacked. Yes, Sanji was slapped on the head with her staff for treating her badly. Your peerage was essentially prepared to fight us after that. So. Naruto walked away, glancing over Sona's shoulder. With her eyesight, Sona was able to see seals made of ink embedded into her peerage's necks, and she recognized the kanji for sleep written within the seals. Sona turned and blinked owlishly as she witnessed her peerage all lying on the floor, their mouths open and drooling slightly. Naruto concluded, ignoring Serafall as she ran her fingers through his hair, I had to put them to sleep. Sona turned back to the blonde and rubbed her temples once more, letting out a sigh. Just finish your explanation as to how, and why you are in a relationship with me, sister, she sighed. Naruto gave a small shrug. Naruto and Serafall then described their first encounter to Sona, saying, fair enough. Me and Serafall met shortly after the Great War ended. How the barrier he had set up in the middle of a clearing was discovered by accident by Serafall. How she managed to get past the obstacle. An issue Naruto was still attempting to resolve. When Serafall first discovered him dozing off beneath a sakura tree, he woke up to see her sitting in front of him, humming a happy tune. Sona was informed that Naruto was initially apprehensive about her, but that after a short while, he eventually warmed up to her. The amount of fun they had conversing and occasionally sparring, as well as the first day they spent together. They described to her how, for almost 300 years, they were initially very close friends. Serafall's affections for Naruto started to evolve after the first century. Since she had just been promoted to Mao, Serafall explained to Sona that she was too busy to act on those feelings at the time. After settling her position, she told her sister that she was actually thinking about telling Naruto how she felt, but she was unable to do so because, once again, she was needed to maintain the tenuous peace between the three factions from the devil's side. She reminded her that although she felt ready to express her feelings, she had to prioritize being the best older sister she could be after being born. She finally admitted her feelings to Sona almost a month ago, and she couldn't be happier about it. In a similar vein, Naruto told Sona that Serafall was a lot of fun to be around and that she had rapidly grown to be one of his closest friends. He clarified that he fell in love with her after spending a lot of time with her, but he never followed through on his feelings, thinking Serafall was already under enough stress. They concluded their tale by discussing how they met. Sona's face was expressionless as she gazed at the contented couple. But Sona smiled slightly, and Serafall and Naruto could see the peculiarity of her lips. Sona blushed in shame and said, I see. I'm happy for you, Oni. Sama. And. Oh. Oni. Sama. Serafall squealed and lunged at her sister, embracing her tightly as her body swelled with unbridled joy. Sona let out a sigh, but she didn't fight her sister. Rather, she slowly raised her arms and blushed in shame as she gave her sister a quick hug in return. Sona coughed to save face, and Serafall smiled, releasing the hug. Naruto put a hand on her head and ruffled her hair, but she failed. Well, you know about me. Now how about I learn more about you, Immortal? Naruto said affectionately as Serafall kissed him on the cheek and smiled broadly while signaling Sona to follow suit. Sona experienced what it was like to have an older brother that day. She also had to say, she didn't understand Rias's frequent complaints about her brother. As everyone waited for the last few attendees of their meeting, the room was comparatively quiet. There were two blondes, a male and a female, to the right of the big table in the center of the room. They both had a serene aura about them, and their eyes were blue. A rather attractive man was seated in the center of the table. His black hair was neck-length with yellow highlights, and he smiled lazily, his red eyes glimmering a little. Beside him sat a young man dressed entirely in black. The young man had silvery gray hair and blue, tinted, slightly sparkling gray eyes. Despite his casual smile, there was something sinister about it. Four other figures were seated to the left of the table. One had turquoise eyes and shoulder-length crimson red hair. A woman in a maid's uniform was standing behind him. Her eyes were the same color as her hair. Another man sat beside the red-haired one. This had black hair that reached her shoulders and blue eyes that cautiously looked around the room. He was tapping his elbow lightly while his arms were folded. Another man was the last person inside. His hair was dark brown, nearly black, and reached his neck. His hair was untidy, if a little wild. What was most noticeable was his forest green, with one hand supporting his head while the other lightly tapped the table. Shortly afterward, the door leading out of the room opened, and Rias Gremory and her peerage entered. That was followed by Sona's entrance, with her peers trailing behind. In a worried tone, Rias said, "We're not late, are we?" The man with the red hair, who looked a lot like Rias when they were together, said something. "No, you're not late, little sister, just take a seat anywhere you see." She smiled as she said, "Thank, ni. Sama." Sirzex, her older brother, gave his younger sister a joyful smile. Sona and Rias, with their peerages, sat down and watched. Ajuka said. He glanced at the empty chair next to Sirzex and then at the other empty chair next to that one, saying, "Looks like almost everyone is here. All we need now is Serafall. I still don't understand why she requested another chair. Especially on the condition that that chair is placed next to hers," he said with disbelief. Sirzex gave a reflective hum. "Maybe she wanted someplace to rest her legs?" he suggested. "Perhaps she is bringing a guest?" asked Grafia. Falbium said nonchalantly, knowing her, "She probably is bringing someone along." Azazel laughed, and the room reverberated with the sound. He smiled and said, "Makes you wonder who she is bringing, don't it? I must admit I'm rather curious." Gabriel, the blonde, whispered to herself, "I also wonder what my rival is up to." Michael, her brother and the archangel who is now in charge of heaven, hummed a little. "To be honest, I stopped questioning Serafall's motives long ago. She's just so confusing to me," he grumbled. Ajuka gave a snort. Falbium nodded in agreement with Ajuka's assessment, saying, "You and me both. I stopped trying to understand her a long time ago. I haven't had a headache since." While the others chuckled momentarily, Azazel laughed. Grafia cut in sharply, "Serafall. Sama is still late, and that is unacceptable." The silver-haired maid whispered, "I wonder where she could be." Sona put a firm hand on the red-haired Gremory's shoulder, preventing her from speaking. The two engaged in a silent conversation while staring into each other's eyes. "Don't say a word, Rias." "Why not? My sister asked me to keep the subject of her and Naruto silent until she arrives." "Really? Why?" Sona's eyes sparkled as she said, "She wants it to be a surprise. Besides, can you imagine the leaders of the three fractions having such dumbfounded expressions?" A naughty twinkle. Rias blinked in surprise at that. After giving it some thought, she concluded that she would pay to watch everyone's shocked reactions. Rias smirked as she leaned back in her chair, and a twinkle that looked a lot like Sona's appeared in her eyes. Falbium took note of their conversation and arched an eyebrow curiously. They were still chatting among their respective fraction leaders, talking about ordinary things up until Serafall showed up. They waited for a few more minutes before their idle chatter was cut off by the sound of two voices outside the room, which were gradually approaching. "I still can't believe this is considered formal wear. I would have preferred a formal kimono besides this restricting thing." A voice that was certainly male said. A different voice answered, one that the others knew to be Serafall's, "But I think you look great in a tux." The man answered, "I'm not saying that it doesn't look good, just saying that it's restricting. I feel like I'm walking as stiff as a board." Serafall said, "It's only for today, Naru.tan. Please be patient." "Alright. I just hope I don't have to wear something like this again in the future." Serafall exclaimed, "Yay, Naru.tan is always so compromising." The man laughed. "Is this the door, Sarah? Chan?" Yep. I hope we're not late." The door opened, and everyone's gaze focused on the two new people in the room. Even though Serafall was dressed formally in a suit and tie, she still looked stunning. Only a handful of people in the room knew the other individual. Some of them were reminded of the Phoenix clan by his spiky golden hair, but they knew he wasn't one of them. His warm and inquisitive sapphire blue eyes glistened. The three whisker marks on his cheeks were the most intriguing. He had on an orange bow tie and a black tuxedo. He was tugging at the collar of his tux, which suggested that he was a little uneasy. Rias's peerage tensed slightly at his arrival. The person most impacted was Kaneko, who cautiously and somewhat in awe gazed at the blonde. Even though she didn't want to be relaxed, the senjutsu she experienced from him did just that. When they regained consciousness, Sona explained the situation to them, so Sona's peerage was unaffected. "Sorry we're late, everyone," said Serafall with a smile on her face. "Serafall. said Ajuka. Glad to see you made it. If I may ask, who is the man with you? He inquired. As he spoke, Naruto took a step forward and bowed slightly. Greetings, it's an honor to meet the esteemed leaders of the three fractions. I am Naruto Uzumaki. When Naruto concluded his introduction, Serafall declared bluntly, Naru.Tan is my queen. Everybody blinked. What? Sirzex questioned, startled, expressing the astonishment of all. Even Azazel, the fallen angel with the black hair, was taken aback, blinking as he took in the information. When Serafall and Naruto kissed for a moment, the whole room fell silent. They have all gradually gotten wider until they only look like plates. He's also my fiancé, Serafall added with joy, shocking the unprepared audience once more. 5 seconds passed in complete silence before two gentle thuds broke the stillness. Gabriel and Graphia were fainting from shock, which is why they made those two thuds. Ajuka's mouth opened and closed, eyes wide. For the first time in his life, he was unable to think clearly and was completely stunned. Sirzex's face remained expressionless, as though he had just learned that his younger sister had grown up and had a child. He slid out of his chair slowly, feeling numb all over, and soon he was on the floor with his wife. Falbium's mouth hung open and his eyes were wide as the sentence attempted to remail itself into his mind. When it did, he was left with nothing to say but rambling, unintelligible gibberish. Azazel blinked quickly, then smiled a little shakily as he leaned back and tried to gather himself. He wasn't performing it very well. You can see the shock in Valley's eyes even though he just blinked. At last, Michael. He appeared as though he had recently learned that one of his priests was a pervert. Naruto and Serafall started laughing and held each other while they did so. The rest of her peers could only stare in disbelief while Rias could only laugh. Except for Issei and Akeno, who were already aware. As her peers laughed, Sona maintained a straight face, but her trembling shoulders and a tiny lip twitch revealed who she was. It took almost half an hour for everyone to recover, and Ajuka was the first to speak. Serafall and Naruto were happy to sit next to each other, with Serafall's hand resting on top of Naruto's as they held them beneath the table. Still struggling to comprehend, Ajuka said, Serafall, this man is your fiancé and queen? Serafall nodded enthusiastically. Serafall nodded once more as he said, if you made him your queen, then that means you finally used the evil piece set that I gave you. Azazel questioned, what's so special about the evil set you gave her? As you all know, evil pieces all have a certain limit based on the value beings have. If the value is high, the more pieces are used. If a being proves to be too strong, then it is impossible for the evil piece to reincarnate them. Even if that piece is a mutated piece. Ajuka sighed and pondered in his mind before deciding to explain. The others knew that already and nodded. With the exception of the four Mao and Naruto, everyone's eyes widened in surprise as he said, however, the original evil piece sets I created, the first 4 I distributed to Sirzex, myself, Falbium, and Serafall, have no limits. Michael questioned, why do they have no limits? When we needed to increase the devil population, and I set about creating the evil piece system, I didn't really have limits in mind when I designed them. When I distributed the first 4 sets, Falbium was the one to point out the floor of distributing pieces with no limits to other devils. Devils are naturally selfish beings. Also greedy, and arrogant as well. It was Falbium's concern that devils would seek beings far stronger than they were, and attempt to foolishly force them into their peerages. Such actions would immediately get them killed, thus, lowering the population of devils even more. Ajuka elaborated. It was another few weeks later did I correct the system, and pieces with certain limits were placed. The fact that only 4 evil piece sets with no limits existed was kept a tightly guarded secret between the Mao. Ajuka concluded. Michael whispered, I see. Gabriel shuddered a little as she pictured shady devils obtaining control of all strong creatures. Valley grinned beside Azazel as he whistled in wonder, damn, you devils are full of surprises aren't you? After Falbium shrugged, he saw that Sirzex was staring at Naruto intently. Something wrong, Sirzex? He asked, raising an eyebrow. As everyone's eyes shifted to Sirzex, Naruto also raised an eyebrow. It's nothing really, it's just, I never took Sarah to be the type to rob the cradle. Sirzex laughed and waved Falbium away. Seeing where Sirzex was taking this, Azazel smiled and said, yeah, she's like what? A little over 300 or so years old. That's definitely robbing the cradle. That sentence seemed to make everyone laugh a little, but when the couple burst out laughing instead of Serafall pouting or Naruto flushing, everyone blinked and frowned in confusion. Sirzex was the one who asked, what's funny? After Naruto and Serafall had both finished laughing. Naruto laughed and said, "Sorry, but what you just claimed is pretty funny. If anyone is the cradle robber in this relationship, it's Naru.tan, said Serafall. Ajuka raised an eyebrow and said, "How can he be the cradle robber in this situation?" Naruto smiled and replied, "I'm over millions of years old. I was alive before angels, devils, and fallen angels came to be." The older generation stared, their brains processing the fact that this man lived before their species' time, while the younger devils tried to comprehend that someone could live that long. The room was eerily quiet. Azazel smirked and whispered, "I can definitely see how he's the cradle robber." The idea of learning about a time before the three factions existed made Ajuka's eyes sparkle a little as Falbium said, "If you truly have been alive for so long, the stories you must have. You practically a walking artifact." Michael and Sirzex whispered, "Very amazing." Gabriel pondered in wonder, "Is it possible to even live that long?" And others agreed. Clinging to the blonde, Serafall affirmed, "What Naru.tan says is true." Amused, Naruto remarked, "As much as I would love to swap stories with all of you." He also hinted that he thought you had a rather important meeting to hold. Everyone laughed sheepishly at that. "He has a point. As the leader of the angels, I am ready to begin," Michael said. Azazel followed up with ease, saying, "I, as well, am ready to begin." Sirzex said, "And we, the four Mao of the underworld, are ready to begin." The other Mao nodded in agreement. He never really liked politics, and while he did wish to be Hokage when he was younger, he was only able to do two things during the centuries he spent watching over Kaguya while she slept in the seal: train and think. Naruto leaned back in his chair, happy to watch the meeting go forward. He just thought and trained until he was mentally and physically exhausted. He developed new techniques and eventually mastered them. He reflected on all of his shortcomings, past, present, and occasionally future, and after 100 years of guarding Kaguya, he reflected on his desire to become Hokage before concluding that he would detest the politics that would accompany the position. It worked out for him that he was always the head on type of guy, preferring to either talk sense into people, beat sense into them, or both talk and beat sense into them. He was unable to come up with intricate plans like Shikamaru that would put him 10 to 15 steps ahead of you, and he much preferred to make up plans as he went along. In addition to being the strongest shinobi in the village, being Hokage was also about politics, and as a genin, he witnessed the problems that most politics brought about, with Dodo serving as a prime example. For this reason, he decided that, even though being Hokage was possible, he didn't want to deal with it. Looking back, Naruto wondered, how did things turn out after the mess with Kaguya was over? He chose not to dwell on it. It was all behind him now, and he could only look to the future. He glanced at Serafall, who was participating in the discussion among the faction leaders, and gave the lovely girl a small smile, assuming that as long as Serafall was with him, everything would be fine. It was nearly impossible to be unhappy with Serafall around him because she was the one who found him, saved him from loneliness, and had a cheerful, carefree personality that always lifted his spirits. Observing the other people in the room, he looked at the leaders of the three factions and noticed something that made him smile. They were all warriors who had participated in war and taken lives, but what really made him smile was the look of determination in their eyes, the look of peace. Although it was well concealed and took him a moment to notice, the desire for peace was evident in their eyes, and Naruto knew that no matter what happened during this meeting, peace would result. This made Naruto happy, but the boy next to Azazel, Valley, worried him. The blonde could tell that the silver-haired boy loved fighting, and Naruto was certain of that. As a result, Naruto was a little worried about whether his love of fighting would stop him from wanting peace. Only time would tell. He glanced at the younger people in the room, Rias and her peers, who were fully focused on the meeting, but Issei's somewhat perplexed expression caused Naruto to chuckle softly. When Serafall heard him laugh, she looked at him, raising a thin eyebrow in interest. Naruto gave her a smile and squeezed her hand, indicating that everything was fine without saying anything. The black-haired girl gave him a warm, affectionate smile before turning back to the meeting, her face changing into a focused and serious expression. When Serafall turned back to the meeting, Naruto turned to face Sona and her peers. Just like Rias, Sona was completely focused on the meeting, listening to every word that was said and observing every detail. Naruto grinned, indicating that the young Seitree had inherited Shikamaru's sharp mind. Her peers were also closely observing the meeting, though some of them were shifting uneasily. Naruto heard Sirzex say, "Why don't we ask the younger generation what they think?" He blinked and listened more intently, as if Sirzex wanted the younger people watching the meeting to have a say. Naruto grinned as he heard each of them respond, but when they reached Issei, Naruto raised an eyebrow. He laughed sheepishly and said, "Well, I don't really know, I'm sorry, I can't really understand. Azazel smirked and said, think of it like this, Issei-kun. He explained in a rather unique way that if there is peace, you can have sex all you want. If there is war, you can't have sex with Rias and have kids. The people around her were laughing at her misfortune, and Rias's eyes were widened comically, and her face was flushed. Issei shouted quickly, peace. I want peace. That way I can have sex with Buchu. Arrow. Sensei. Your legacy lives on, which is disturbing. Naruto blinked and glanced up at the ceiling, silently praying to Jiraiya, wondering absently if Issei would write books and call them the Icha series. What about you, Valley? Azazel inquired, and Naruto listened more intently. Naruto squinted at Valley's response, which was far too ambiguous to be an answer. I don't really care either way. As long as I have strong people to fight, I'm fine. Azazel said, what about you, Naruto-san? What's your opinion? The other two turned to face the blonde, waiting for his answer, which Serafall, of course, already knew, and she grinned at him. Naruto smiled and replied, a rather useless question, Azazel-san. I have and will always desire peace. So it's decided then. Sirzex said, smiling, there will be peace between our factions, and let's hope that it lasts for centuries to come. Azazel said, amen to that. Before the festivities could begin, it felt like time had stopped and everyone was motionless. With a panicked, what's going on? Issei asked. With a tone of surprise and worry, Rias pondered, could it be that Gasper's sacred gear activated? Naruto remained seated and muttered, how interesting. After being shocked, Rias asked, how are we not affected? I'm not sure why either. Can you explain Gasper's sacred gear to me? Rias quickly clarified, it stops everything in his field of vision, but he can't control and it happens at random. Perhaps Gasper did not want us to be affected by his scared gear. Naruto speculated. I also sense over dozens of presences getting steadily closer here, Naruto continued. How could they have converged so close to us without us knowing? Rias pondered. Naruto snapped his fingers in front of an unresponsive Azazel and remarked, I've sensed them gathering quite a while ago. Rias demanded, why didn't you say something before? I was curious as to what they're doing. If I had known what they were planning this, I would have confronted them. Issei yelled, why are you not worried? Naruto responded, because the situation can be remedied easily. Rias questioned bewilderedly, how? It all happened in a flash. Naruto was sitting in his chair peacefully 1 minute, and then Issei and Rias yelled as a sudden gust of wind blew through the room, causing the doors to fling open and shut. What? Rias muttered in shock, the blonde no longer present. The blonde carefully placed a startled and somewhat frightened Gasper down as Naruto reappeared with the sudden burst of wind. Rias stared at Naruto in shock and disbelief, asking numbly, just how fast are you? Issei agreed with her as he gaped. Hello Gasper, I'm Naruto. Do you think you can reverse the effects of your sacred gear? He asked politely. We have more pressing concerns, Naruto declared. Why? Yes. Gasper stammered nervously, and everyone blinked as the little blonde's eyes flashed. The others were as perplexed as Sirzex, who asked, what just happened? And why is Gasper here? Grimly, Rias declared, there's no time to explain, we're under attack. Everyone stiffened, and Michael asked, really, by whom? And why? Who would want to interfere with our peace conference? Those who do not wish for peace to exist, Naruto said with his lips pressed together. It appears the majority of the ones who are surrounding us are humans. There are quite a few devils, angels, and fallen as well. They are numbering in the hundreds now. Their numbers have increased, he said. For the first time, Serafall wondered why God loved humans. Was it because they were his subjects? Was it because he was so loving? Serafall's mind automatically compared them to the humans who had mistreated her lover eons ago. Now, humans were trying to keep peace between the three factions. Didn't they see that it worked for them, as they wouldn't be in danger anymore? This demonstrated that modern humans were no superior to those who had harmed her, Naru.tan. Sona inquired, what's the plan? Ajuka started to say, we should. But Naruto interrupted him by putting a hand on his shoulder. Naruto declared, I'll deal with them. He walked to the window and looked out at the few hundred magicians and renegade exorcists who were gathered there, as well as a few devils, angels, and fallen, all of whom had hateful and disdainful eyes. Issei, who was the only one who asked in shock, are you crazy? Serafall had complete faith in Naruto, though she was concerned, while everyone else was interested in what Naruto could do. I am sure that I am more than enough for them. To be honest, it's a bit unfair, for them anyway, Naruto said, folding his arms and giving Issei a neutral look. Graphia asked in a neutral tone, "Is it confidence or arrogance from which you speak?" Naruto responded, "It is neither." He put his hands on the ground, and everyone blinked when they realized they were on the building's roof rather than the room they were in. "It's fact," Naruto said, and then he leapt from the roof while everyone watched him in silence. Many of the many exorcists and magicians around him were startled when Naruto landed roughly on the ground because smoke was obscuring his form in a menacing way. When the smoke cleared, Naruto was standing straight, his eyes, which had once been warm sapphire blue, were cold and gleaming like glaciers as he folded his arms. Neutrally, he said, "I'll give you all a single chance. Turn around and leave." An exorcist sneered loudly, "Don't look down on us, abomination." The others around him appeared to agree, as they all sneered at Naruto. "We will destroy all you devils, and the rest of the devil lovers." With his bangs casting a shadow over his eyes, Naruto said softly, "I tried. Perhaps this is why Madara lost faith in peace so long ago." The same exorcists yelled, "Let's kill this abomination, and all the other devil lovers in this town." The others shouted their agreement. The magicians and renegade exorcists were startled to see the blonde in their immediate vicinity as Naruto said, "What makes you think that any of you are going to live past today?" The battle started when one exorcist attempted to slash at the blonde with his sword, but Naruto quickly dodged, releasing the exorcist's blade and stabbing the man with his own weapon, ending his life. It only required that. With a scowl, Naruto jumped into action as dozens of exorcists with bladed weapons charged, their battle cry expressing their bloodlust and desire to exact revenge on their comrade. He dodged, weaved, and avoided all of their swipes and slashes, never even coming close to hitting him. When he did dodge, he retaliated by punching and kicking the attacker in the face or torso. The exorcists screamed in agony, but were silenced when Naruto beheaded the man with his own weapon. Naruto's blows were so strong that when he struck them in the face, some of their necks were broken instantly, and the sickening cracks echoed slightly. Naruto dodged another sword strike and grabbed the offending exorcist's arms, snapping them like a pair of chopsticks. The offender was caught off guard and was unable to react when Naruto grabbed him by the neck and broke it. Naruto used his weapon effectively, blocking and deflecting most of the blows that came his way. He slashed one in the back, severing the spine and causing the man to writhe in agony, and stabbed another, a woman, in the heart, killing her instantly as he pulled the blade out. Naruto used his blade to stop another exorcist's blade from tearing across his back, and when it hit him, the blonde's blade broke. Naruto quickly caught the broken blade and drove it into the man's neck, causing the exorcist to choke on his own blade as he fell to the ground. Naruto threw the handle because he no longer needed it, and it flew at neck, breaking speeds, burying itself in the head of an exorcist who was about to fire his sniper rifle. When the rifle went off, the bullet sped through the hearts of several magicians and exorcists, striking an exorcist who was carrying about C4. As a result, the bullet struck the explosives he was carrying, causing the explosion to kill several dozen exorcists and mages through blast radius and shrapnel. One exorcist shouted, "Grenade," and threw a grenade at the blonde. After catching the grenade and giving it a quick glance, Naruto immediately shoved it into the mouth of the closest exorcist before kicking the exorcist away into another group of exorcists and mage. When the grenade exploded, a number of exorcists and magicians perished, their last cries quieted, and Naruto jumped through the smoke, plunging directly into a sizable group. He killed 3 men who were too close by kicking one man in the face and using the man's weapons. One woman screamed frantically, "We have him! Take him!" The closet full of exorcists and battle magicians charged with battle cries, their pointed weapons eager to taste Naruto's blood. Naruto whispered, "Wind style. Vacuum blast." Suddenly, a huge wind ripple encircled the blonde and pushed outward, driving the charging enemies away. Naruto simply stood in the middle, content to let them gather their courage because he didn't like fighting people when they were too scared, even if they were enemies, and he was fine with waiting for them to do so. The other magicians and exorcists cautiously kept their distance now, uncertainty and fear now filling their minds. All they could do back on the roof was stare in astonishment, and a little fear. "How can anyone be so strong?" Issei whispered, her gaze fixed on the picture. Rias exclaimed, "Incredible." Sona muttered in surprise, "I can see how he defeated Kokebiel." Gabriel nodded beside him as Michael said, "Amazing." He was at a loss for words. Searzex and Ajuka nodded beside Azazel, who said, "Such skill and power. I'm glad he's on our side." With a slight grin of excitement on his lips, Valley maintained eye contact with the blonde. "He's so strong." He whispered to himself, "I definitely want to fight you." Naruto.san. "Hey, where is Serafall?" Falbium asked, and everyone muttered in perplexity as they searched for the immature Mao. There, Sona yelled, drawing everyone's attention as they observed the scene. Even as a wall of ice appeared around him, shielding him from the flames, Naruto stayed put as a number of magicians down below summoned several strong fireballs. Fire! The magicians exclaimed, and the fiery balls of flames raced in his direction. After extinguishing the flames, he let out a weary sigh and said, "You didn't have to step in, you know." Serafall, standing next to him and spinning her magical girl wand, grinned brightly at him. She winked and said, "What kind of queen and wife would I be if I let you do all the work?" Naruto shrugged, and the other exorcists and magicians around them started to feel uneasy. Fair enough. That's Serafall Leviathan. What's she doing here, and why is she interfering? One of the Mao, did she just say wife? Does that mean that him and her are? With a serious look on her fragile face, Serafall stepped forward upon hearing them. Listen up, she yelled, I have seen quite enough. I refuse to stand by any longer as you all try to harm my queen and future husband, she pouted. After advancing to stand beside Serafall, Naruto said, we make quite the pair, don't we, Sarah-chan? After all, wind and ice make a dangerous combination. Yep. Naru.tan's wind will make my ice colder, said Serafall with a bright smile. Their respective elements came to life as if they could hear them. The wind blew around them, causing their hair and clothing to sway. Ice also formed around them, and the wind made it even colder than it was before. The ice grew so cold that a cold mist formed around the slowly growing icicles, and the terrified enemies before them gulped as they breathed. Serafall's face maintained a serious expression as her purple remained determined, surrounded by a thin layer of purplish energy. Naruto also maintained a serious expression, with his arms folded in a thin layer of bluish energy surrounding him. Don't get Naruto wrong. He still wanted peace more than anything and hated killing more than anything, but in the years he lived, he thought a lot and came to the conclusion that his earlier thinking was far too naive and optimistic. Idly, Naruto thought this was a bit overkill. He was more than enough, as evidenced by the decimation he provided. Although he still desired to adhere to his beliefs, he ultimately made the decision to combine those of Tobirama and Hashirama. Tobirama was somewhat similar to Hashirama in that he felt that enemies who posed a threat to peace should be eliminated with extreme prejudice, leaving no room for soft-heartedness. Like Hashirama, Naruto gave others second chances and occasionally thirdsa, but like Tobirama, he would not think twice about cutting you down if you were being unreasonable and you spit those chances in his face. When you combine the two beliefs, it creates a rather unusual and dangerous combination. In any case, Naruto had previously demonstrated that he was capable of handling exorcists and magicians on his own. However, when Serafall is added, it goes beyond the point of overkill, even beyond slaughter. Additionally, because of their intense love for one another, they would make sure to protect each other's backs. Fighting one of them was sufficient, fighting the two together? It was blatant suicide. With fear in their eyes, the remaining magicians and exorcists appeared to realize this and withdrew, with the few spiritual beings present mentally sighing with relief that they had not joined the battle. You're all so useless. A female voice screamed, and a moment later, another person entered the battlefield, and the remaining Rouge exorcists and magicians watched in horror as she strode forward, a smirk on her face, her light brown hair wavy, her blue-gray eyes narrowed in hate and anger, and the female Mao's eyes softened slightly when Serafall saw her, but hardened a moment later. Serafall whispered, her hold on her staff growing increasingly firm, Kateria, Leviathan. Naruto trailed off in a whisper, Leviathan? Is she? Serafall nodded silently. Yes, she is my predecessor, the previous holder of the title Leviathan. Naruto said in a low voice, I see. I say you make a much better Leviathan. Just looking at this woman makes my skin crawl. Serafall heard it, giggled a little, and then her eyes hardened once more. One of the renegade exorcists said, Kateria, Sama. She smirked as she looked down at Serafall and Naruto and said, Silence, you're all so useless, you couldn't even cause a small amount of damage to them. Useless, I'll be sure to give you all proper discipline when this is over. Serafall Leviathan. She started off with a sneer, looking at Naruto and saying, I might even take your lover for myself as well. It's been a long time, hasn't it? I can still remember quite well how you stole the title Leviathan from me. Today, I plan on regaining that title by killing you. A faint trace of anger and disgust flickered through Naruto's eyes, but that was the only emotion that showed through his seemingly neutral expression. Serafall was a completely different story, her head tipped downward, her bangs covering and obscuring her eyes, a deep frown adorning her face, her grip tightening until tiny cracks appeared in her staff, the ice around her creaking and growing colder as they grew wider, and the cold mist growing larger. Kateria grinned and said, "Oh, did I hit a nerve?" Serafall slowly raised her head, and Kateria recoiled when she saw her face. Her neutral expression had vanished, leaving behind a face filled with nothing but rage, hatred, and anger. Everyone else on the rooftop shuddered at her expression, having never seen Serafall like this before. "I don't care if you want your title Leviathan back, but no one threatens to take Naruto-tan from me," Serafall said in a low voice, but everyone could hear her clearly, and they all felt a drop of cold sweat fall down their brows. "Die," Serafall whispered. Her tone was so cold that it made everyone shiver. Instinctively, Kateria jumped back, the ground immediately collapsing as extremely sharp glaciers of ice replaced her, and if she hadn't jumped back, the glaciers would have transformed her into a disfigured dango. Kateria ducked her head, just as a pink staff was about to break her neck and possibly cave in her skull, and for her, everything happened in slow motion as she gazed into Serafall's eyes. Two thoughts crossed Kateria's mind at that moment. Maybe I shouldn't have pissed off Serafall, and I fucked up big time, didn't I? Her purple eyes conveyed nothing but cold rage, and she smirked as she gave Kateria her full attention. Before she could think of anything else, Kateria spat out a glob of blood because Serafall had buried her knee into her gut, and the force was enough to turn a boulder into paste. Before Kateria could get any better, Serafall's wings appeared from her back and gave her a bone-breaking slap to the face, sending her flying to the ground and her face skidding along the ground as she came to a slow stop. When she finally stopped, Kateria moaned and picked herself up, holding her face while her healing factor kicked in, healing her bruised stomach and the injuries on her face. She let go of her face and snarled as the last of her injuries healed. "Serafall, you bitch!" she cried out in anger, but as Naruto appeared in front of her, the blonde burying a Rasengan into her torso, Kateria could only scream in pain as the Rasengan tore through her flesh. She looked into Naruto's irate eyes and wondered what she had done to enrage him. Naruto said angrily, "No one calls Sarah-chan a bitch." A moment later, Kateria was flung from her position, spinning wildly while the Rasengan remained buried in her torso. All she could do was scream in agony as she spun, but she was spared from her agonizing adventure and placed in a new one with a huge ice boulder smashing her into the ground and shards of ice digging into her body. After everything had been cleared away, Kateria lay on the ground, panting and moaning in agony as her wounds gradually healed. She heard footsteps and looked up, gulping as Serafall gave her a chilly look, Naruto joining in. All eyes on the rooftop widened in shock at Valley's actions, while Azazel narrowed his. "I see. So that's how it is. Valley." Serafall raised her staff, ready to finish Kateria, but she was shocked when Valley appeared alongside Kateria, the divine dividing wielder helping the former Leviathan to her feet. Serafall squinted her eyes back down below, and considering how cold her purple eyes were, it was pretty frightening. "Traitor," she growled low. With a frown on his face, Naruto said icily, "I knew I was correct in my first assumption of you." Valley appeared to want to respond, but Kateria's words prevented him from doing so. With gritted teeth, she hissed, "Valley, good, with you this fight will be a lot easier. Your divine dividing along with our master's gift will win us this farce." Naruto's eyes narrowed as he remembered a number of unpleasant snake-related experiences. Why was it that nearly everything involving snakes always ended up being a major problem? Naruto swore that she gained some sort of power-up from those things, and he was about to begin cursing Orochimaru. Yes. Yes. She exclaimed as she unleashed the full force of her power. This is what a true ultimate-class devil is capable of. Kateria smirked as she opened the jar while Valley activated his scared gear, allowing the two snakes to burrow into her skin. Her injuries immediately healed, and she smiled as she felt her powers triple. One thought crossed Naruto's mind. "Orochimaru, you son of a bitch. Even now you cause me trouble." Naruto could picture Orochimaru grinning with laughter. "Smug bastard." He looked at Serafall, observing the tiny drop of perspiration that appeared as a result of Kateria's power-up. Frowning, Naruto measured Kateria's power. She was undoubtedly stronger than Kokebile at the moment, but she was not even close to what he could do. With a frown, Naruto concluded that he wanted to put an end to this as soon as possible and that there was only one way to do so. He also wanted to see how much power divine dividing could divide. "Sarah-chan," he said, attracting Serafall's attention, and he extended his hand to her, giving her a warm and affectionate smile in return. Serafall put her hand in his, their fingers entwining as they held hands. Valley narrowed his eyes next to her, but Kateria laughed and said, "What's this? Sharing one last moment together before you die?" No, they were planning something. His body was now covered in black tribal markings, and he was adorned with a yellow coat made from the energy engulfing him. Instead of responding, Naruto's form became shrouded in pure energy. His clothing became like a second skin as a yellow flame energy overtook him, his eyes turning from blue to crimson red as a slit replaced his pupils, his whisker marks growing into large black bars, and his bangs shooting up, resembling horns. The transformation that Serafall experienced was different from Naruto's. Instead, she was engulfed in a golden cloak of pure energy, which took the shape of a fox, with two tails of energy forming behind as the energy developed ears. The golden energy felt like a second skin, and the energy cloak was adorned with transparent tribal markings. Other than the energy cloak, Serafall did not undergo any significant changes. It was difficult to believe that any being could radiate the amount of power they were giving off, but it was happening in front of them, and all they could do was stare at the two in wonder as the sheer power they felt rolled off them in waves. So much power. I don't think I can divide that much. In spite of this, Valley was beaming broadly, excitement building at the prospect of facing such a strong opponent. Naruto appeared to sense Valley's excitement, as he narrowed his eyes and scowled a little. Serafall joyfully exclaimed, "Naru-tan! I feel like I'm about to start blasting away." Naruto grinned a little. "I haven't adorned this mode in a very long while. Ready to test out your new power boost, Sarah-chan?" Serafall smiled and nodded. Yep. Levia-tan wants to know her new limits. Then let's see just what we're capable of now. It was instinct alone that allowed Valley to avoid the fist that was aiming to smash against his face, but he wasn't so lucky on the next one, as a knee buried itself within his torso. Kateria wasn't as lucky as Valley the first time, as she was unable to deflect or dodge the fist that Serafall slammed into her face, nor was she able to react when Serafall leapt behind her, yanking her hair as he did so, and flung her across the field. Kateria's face skidded across the hard ground, leaving a trail of blood and grime, and she screamed as her movement was stopped by Serafall, who came down with a big ice only hammer in her hands. The black-haired beauty smashed the hammer against Kateria, burying the former Leviathan in the ground as dirt and ice particles blew everywhere. When Serafall raised her hands, ice started swirling together above her, and after a few moments, a huge spear of ice hovered above her, big enough that it could be seen from 5 or so miles away. By all means, Kateria should have been unconscious, or dead, but Serafall felt that she should ensure that Kateria was dead, or that no mercy should be shown. Serafall frowned down at the chasm she had made, and she sent out a quick pulse of magic to check if Kateria was still alive. She could feel the life force of the former Leviathan, and it was very faint, but it was enough to tell Serafall that she was either unconscious or close to death. Serafall had to decide whether to kill the former Leviathan or let her die slowly. Serafall had already decided on one option before she even considered another, and that Hussey had attempted to take her Naru-tan. Serafall brought her hands down with a surprisingly bloodthirsty smirk, and the ice spear followed shortly after. A miniature earthquake erupted, scattering dust and debris along the air and ground, forcing everyone watching the fight to shield their eyes from dust particles, ice fragments, and concrete that threatened to make a home in their eyes. Serafall maintained a neutral expression for a moment, then extended her senses, searching for Kateria's life signs, but failing to find them. Serafall knew that meant two things. Either Kateria was dead or she had escaped. Serafall was sure Kateria was dead, and she stomped away a tiny twinge of guilt Kateria had spat in her face when she had been kind to her decades ago, and worse, she had threatened to take Naru-tan away from her. That hussy had gotten what she deserved. Valley flew past her, smashing into a building, with some debris falling on top of him. Naruto stopped next to her and kissed her on the lips, saying, "I'll be right back, honey. Me and Valley are still bonding." Naruto then walked to the pile of rubble, and Serafall gave a small giggle before turning to face the remaining hostiles. She said darkly, "You all have 10 seconds to decide which is more important. Your lives, or your ignorant attempts to defeat me and my fiancé." They all backed away and retreated in a matter of seconds, and Serafall tilted her head and nodded in satisfaction as Naruto stopped next to her once more, his golden aura powering down with a frown on his face and the golden cloak she was wearing disappearing as well. "Something wrong, Naru-tan?" she asked him. Somehow Valley escaped. I am not sure how, but one second I was waiting for him to burst out of the rubble, the next, his energy signature completely vanished. Naruto clarified. I can't sense him anywhere near here. After a brief moment of frowning, Serafall's face broke into a broad smile as she jumped at the blonde, her arms snagging his neck and her legs encircling his waist. "Who cares? We won. That means we can finish the peace meeting. And the sooner we do that, the sooner we can snuggle in our bed," she exclaimed with joy. "Yes, that does sound grand." Naruto grinned and caressed Serafall's hair while staring into her eyes as they kissed for a few moments before they parted ways. Serafall reluctantly let go of him, but she steadfastly refused to let go of his hand. The power couple returned to the others, and they were met with shocked, amazed, and slightly scared looks from the others. However, this did not change the fact that everyone was secretly terrified of Serafall getting angry and of Naruto's immense power. The following months were peaceful, with no unexpected attacks, and the three factions quietly preparing for a confrontation with the Chaos Brigade. They frequently exchanged information and tactics to improve their cooperation. The peace meeting went on, and the three factions agreed to an alliance that would last until the Chaos Brigade was dealt with a very high chance of becoming permanent. For many others, it was also a moment of surprise. Our favorite blonde was the one who got a surprise that was unmatched. Naruto whispered softly and in a daze, "Please repeat that, Sarah-chan." Serafall's bright purple eyes were filled with love and care as she gazed at him, her hands gently caressing her stomach. Her voice was gentle and affectionate as she said, "I'm pregnant, Naru-tan. The two of us are going to be a mother and father." She was confident in her love's response to the news, and she was right to be so. Naruto's face broke into a big smile as he put his arms around Serafall, kissed her, and then pressed his ear to her stomach. Serafall was laughing. "Naru-tan, the baby isn't gonna kick yet. I'm only a month along after all. I'm going to be a father. This is wonderful," Naruto replied, lifting his gaze and gazing into Serafall's eyes with such love and adoration that it made Serafall want to melt. "And I have you to thank for this, Sarah-chan." He kissed Serafall on the lips and gently pressed his forehead against hers. "I love you, Sarah-chan. I am so glad I met you." They were about to kiss again when they heard Lady Citri squeal down the hall. Serafall grinned, pressing her body against the blonde's while maintaining eye contact. "I know, Naru-chan. And I love you too. Did you hear that, honey? Finally, grandchildren? Quick. Call Sona. She must hear the news. I have to invite Lady Gremory and Lady Phenex to the baby shower. It will be amazing." Serafall nodded happily as Naruto, who was sweating, said, "Well, it's safe to say that your parents know." The next few months of Serafall's pregnancy were, to put it mildly, interesting because she had been the talk of the entire Devil Society, with devils talking and gossiping about her pregnancy every day. There was also the baby shower that Lady Citri planned, which was an interesting experience because many of the attendants had quirky personalities. It was safe to assume that the entire school was aware that Sona would become an aunt. When Azazel heard the news, he muttered to himself that a miniature Serafall was going to start wreaking havoc and decided to have some backup plans just in case. Sona had been shocked to learn that her sister was pregnant and that she was expected to become an aunt, and she had fainted at first when she heard it. The other angels all felt a sense of relief in their chests, but they couldn't explain why. When Michael and Gabriel heard, well, Gabriel squealed, while Michael just blinked. He was really surprised, because he expected it to happen, but not so soon. He immediately followed Azazel's lead, and there was no way he was going to let a little mini Serafall on crack come within a mile of heaven. The day Serafall went into labor was quickly approaching. While Serafall slept on a nearby chair and Ajuka read over some notes to some experiments he was working on, Naruto paced nervously back and forth, his lips pursed and his hands folded neatly behind his back. Both Lord and Lady Citri drank cups of coffee, enjoying the taste of it even though they didn't feel anything. Sona was seated in front of Rias, with a table between them. The two kings were playing chess, and Sona had just won by capturing Rias's queen. The short-haired girl scowled when her queen was taken back, a mistake she would never make again. She moved her rook, whispered, "Check," and waited for Rias to make a move. The rook was unable to capture her king because Rias had moved her pawn forward in response. Sona moved her bishop and said, "Check." Rias scowled and reluctantly moved her king. Sona moved her knight and folded her hands, saying, "Checkmate." Rias blinked, looked around the board, and scowled when she realized that Sona was right. The red-haired girl whispered, "Well played." Rematch? Sona nodded silently, and the two proceeded to reset the board. They were not allowed to play another game because the door opened and the doctor emerged. The doctor was immediately uncomfortable because everyone's eyes were on him, but he still grinned at Naruto. "Mr. Uzumaki, congratulations, your wife has given birth to healthy triplets." Sona whispered, Triplets?" Lord and Lady Citri both smiled with excitement. Rias mirrored Sona's reaction. Ajuka dropped his notes. Serzek's reaction was predictable, and the red-haired mouse snored. The news caused Naruto's eyes to widen, but then a broad smile took over his face. He ran into the room, and his heart melted when he saw Serafall holding 3 babies tenderly. Naruto approached slowly, and Serafall's eyes focused on his approaching figure. She smiled and motioned for Naruto to pick up one of them, and he took it, realizing it was a girl. Two were, in fact, girls, and the last one was a boy. With his daughter in his arms, he whispered, "Have you named them yet?" Serafall nodded contentedly. She started by pointing to the girl in her left arm, saying, "This one." Their daughter had black hair, just like Serafall. "Is Sararise?" Naruto smiled and said, "Named after you, no doubt." Serafall nodded. "Sararise." "Yes, whilst Fall is in my name, Rise is in hers." "What of his name?" asked Serafall, with a gentle smile, as Naruto pointed to the boy in her right arm, who had the same kind of blonde hair as him. She whispered affectionately, "This is one was born seconds before Sararise. Boruto. Named after you." Naruto grinned, and at last he pointed to the daughter he was holding, who had blonde hair with black highlights and streaks. "What of our daughter here?" Serafall's eyes betrayed a profound affection for each of the three children, and Naruto was aware that he shared this sentiment. "She was born first. Our beautiful little Surara." Naruto grinned and leaned forward, kissing Serafall and then their children's foreheads. "All wonderful names," he whispered. There were no devils, angels, or the fallen, and the whole experience with Chaos Brigade was the last thing on their minds because they did not believe in the outside world. The family ignores the squeal that undoubtedly came from Lady Citri as she peeked into the room. Their tiny room, where they were living with their three kids, was the only world in existence at the moment.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.